The most incredible story ever told doesn't begin with "once upon a time," but with "in the beginning." From darkness to light, from chaos to order, we embark on an epic journey that shaped civilizations and continues to echo in our world today. The Old Testament is not just a religious record, it is the grand drama of humanity in its search for meaning. Filled with unlikely heroes, powerful villains, and astonishing divine interventions. Why did a patriarch nearly sacrifice his own son? How did a shepherd become the adversary of the most powerful empire on earth? What led a prosperous kingdom to collapse in just 3 generations? From creation to exile, we will uncover how small choices triggered monumental consequences. How seemingly impossible promises were fulfilled in unexpected ways, and how an imperfect people carried a universal hope. Prepare yourself for a narrative where gardens speak of lost perfection, floods reveal new beginnings, abandoned towers explain our differences, and a small people in the Middle East become the epicenter of a story that continues to challenge our understanding of human destiny. This is the incredible story of the Old Testament, a tale where the supernatural meets the everyday, where the divine and the human intertwine, and where the past illuminates our present. Our journey begins at the most fundamental moment in history, the very beginning of existence. Genesis 1:1 tells us, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Before this moment, only God existed, eternal, without beginning or end. By a deliberate act of will, he brought into existence everything we know." The biblical narrative describes that, at first, the earth was formless and empty, with darkness covering the face of the deep, while the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. It was in this primordial scene that God declared, "Let there be light." Genesis 1:3-4 records, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness." This first day established a pattern. God speaks, matter obeys, and the Creator declares his work good. On the second day, God separated the waters, creating an expanse called sky, the atmosphere surrounding our planet. The third day brought 2 significant acts. First, God gathered the waters below the sky, allowing dry land to appear. Then, he commanded the earth to produce vegetation. Reproductive capability was embedded from the beginning, with each plant containing the code to generate similar offspring. The fourth day saw the creation of celestial bodies to provide illumination and mark time and seasons. On the 5th day, God filled the waters and skies with living creatures, blessing them to multiply. The 6th day first witnessed the creation of land animals and, as its crowning work, the creation of humanity. Finally, on the 7th day, God rested, not due to exhaustion, but to establish a pattern for his creation. This divine rest would become the foundation for the Sabbath, a day set apart for rest and worship. The formation of human beings is described in unique detail. Unlike everything that came before, humans were created in the very image and likeness of God himself. Genesis 1:26-27 states, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that crawls on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." Here we observe 2 fundamental aspects. First, the use of the plural "let us make," suggesting deliberation within the Godhead. Second, the clear affirmation that both man and woman equally bear the divine image. This image grants humanity intrinsic value and dignity, along with unique capabilities. Genesis 2 provides further details. "Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." This description evokes the image of a potter carefully shaping his creation. What animated this form was not a mere verbal command like in previous days, but an intimate act, the very breath of God imparting life. With the first man created, God prepared a special dwelling for him. Genesis 2:8-9 states, "And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he placed the man whom he had formed." Eden was a place of beauty, abundance, and provision. In this garden, humanity received its primary vocation. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. Work was not a punishment, but part of the original design. Man was made for productive activity and responsible stewardship over creation. Along with this privilege came a clear instruction regarding the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This single restriction amid so much freedom established moral choice as a fundamental element of the human experience. Yet something was still missing. Genesis 2:18 observes, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a suitable helper for him." After bringing all the animals before the man to be named, God provided the solution. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he slept, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to him. Adam's response reveals the depth of this bond. "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." This first poem in history celebrates the complementarity and unity between man and woman. What was life like in this perfect garden before sin? The Bible gives us glimpses of an existence marked by harmony on multiple levels, between humans and God, between man and woman, and between humanity and creation. The relationship with God was characterized by closeness and intimacy. Genesis 3:8 references God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, suggesting a regular and tangible divine presence. There were no spiritual barriers. Communion was direct and natural. Between man and woman, there was complete transparency. Genesis 2:25 states, "Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame." This shameless nakedness represents a relationship without barriers, without emotional hiding, and without the need for social masks. The relationship with the environment was one of responsible stewardship, not exploitation or struggle. Work in the garden was neither toilsome nor frustrating, but rather fulfilling and productive. The earth responded generously to the care of its stewards. Death had not yet entered the world as a universal reality. Existence was marked by abundance, not scarcity. There was no need for competition over resources or anxiety about future provisions. The garden provided everything necessary for a full and satisfying life. At the same time, this was not an existence without purpose. Humans had meaningful work, clear responsibilities, and the necessity of making moral choices. The presence of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the center of the garden represented a clear boundary, a reminder that though made in God's image, humans were not gods. The tree of life, also present in the garden, suggests that physical immortality was accessible to the first humans. Death was a potential threat, but not an inevitable reality, as it would later become. In this paradise-like setting, the first couple enjoyed shalom, the comprehensive peace that encompasses physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual well-being. This was God's original design for human life on earth. However, Eden's perfect harmony would not last forever. Genesis 3 introduces a new character. Now the serpent was more cunning than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. And it said to the woman, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" The tempter's strategy begins with a subtle distortion of God's word, turning his generous permission into an apparently petty restriction. This verbal manipulation seeks to plant a seed of doubt about God's goodness. The woman responds by partially correcting the distortion, but already shows signs of negative influence by adding to the prohibition and diminishing the certainty of the consequences. The serpent then moves to direct contradiction. You will certainly not die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This accusation suggests that God is deliberately withholding something beneficial from humans for selfish reasons. The text then describes the internal process of temptation. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. We notice three aspects of the fruit's appeal: physical, aesthetic, and intellectual. The decision to eat the fruit represented more than mere disobedience. It was a declaration of spiritual independence, a rejection of divine authority, an attempt to establish moral autonomy. A significant detail is Adam's passive presence during this event. Apparently, he was present during the serpent's dialogue with the woman, but did not intervene. He failed in his role as a guardian, and then consciously participated in the transgression. The fall was immediate. Right after eating the fruit, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. The knowledge they gained did not bring liberating enlightenment, but rather an awareness of vulnerability and shame. The first action after the fall, covering themselves with fig leaves, symbolizes all subsequent human attempts to hide shame and project an image of self-sufficiency that masks inner brokenness. The repercussions of disobedience were immediate and far-reaching. Genesis 3:8 records the first spiritual consequence. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. The relationship that was once marked by open communion was now characterized by fear and hiding. God initiates a dialogue. Where are you? This question was meant to provoke confession and self-awareness. Instead, it was met with evasion and blame-shifting. Adam implicitly blames both the woman and God. The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. The woman, in turn, shifts the blame to the serpent. The serpent deceived me, and I ate. God then pronounces specific judgments for each participant, beginning with the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This first promise of redemption foretells a decisive defeat of evil, though at a cost to the human victor. For the woman, the consequences involved pain in childbirth and tension in the marital relationship. The man received the most extensive judgment. Work would become arduous, the ground resistant to his efforts, and death would be his inevitable fate. Yet divine mercy remained active even amid judgment. God provided garments of skin to cover the couple's nakedness, suggesting the first animal sacrifice to cover human shame. Finally, came the expulsion from the garden, not merely as punishment, but also as mercy. Preventing access to the tree of life meant avoiding the dreadful possibility of immortality in a state of perpetual sin. The garden, now guarded by cherubim, would remain in humanity's collective memory as a symbol of the lost paradise and the need for restoration that could only come through divine initiative. Outside the Garden of Eden, the story of humanity began to unfold with the birth of the first children. Genesis 4:1-2 records, "The man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." Then she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. These first brothers represent two fundamental ways of human subsistence, different vocations, yet equally legitimate. The narrative quickly shifts to an act of worship. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. The text does not explicitly explain why Abel's offering was accepted while Cain's was rejected. Possible reasons include the superior quality of Abel's offering, the internal attitude of the worshippers, or the nature of the sacrifice itself. Regardless of the reason, God's differing response exposed issues within Cain's heart. Cain's reaction reveals his character. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. God then approaches him with counsel and a warning, revealing fundamental truths about the nature of sin, its threatening proximity, its almost personal aggressiveness, and humanity's responsibility to resist it. Tragically, Cain rejects this counsel. Cain said to Abel, his brother, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. The first human death was not natural, but a premeditated murder. Brother against brother. God's response is immediate. "Where is Abel, your brother?" Once again, just as with Adam in the garden, God begins with a question to which he already knows the answer. And once again, he is met with evasion. "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The judgment is pronounced with a powerful image. "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." The earth, already cursed after the fall, now becomes even more hostile to Cain. The farmer who spilled blood upon the soil would find only barrenness under his hands. Surprisingly, God responds to Cain's concern with a measure of protection. "And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him." This act of mercy toward an unrepentant murderer demonstrates the complexity of divine justice. Even in his judgment, God limits violence and preserves life. After his sentence, Cain departed from the divine presence and settled in the land of Nod, whose name means wandering, reflecting his status as a fugitive. Despite the curse upon the land, Cain managed to establish himself, marry, and have descendants. Genesis 4:17 states, "Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch." This first mention of urban construction in the Bible marks the beginning of human civilization. The city represented security, stability, and community, precisely what Cain, as a condemned wanderer, desired most. Cain's descendants developed the first technologies and arts. Genesis 4:20-22 records, "Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron." Here we see the development of nomadic herding with Jabal, music with Jubal, and metallurgy with Tubal-Cain. Though separated from God's presence, Cain's lineage demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and cultural creativity, a reflection of the image of God that remained in them despite sin. However, alongside this material progress came moral deterioration. Lamech, a fifth-generation descendant of Cain, introduced polygamy by taking 2 wives. Even more disturbing is his Song of the Sword in Genesis 4:23-24. "I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me." If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. This song reveals a spirit of disproportionate vengeance and glorification of violence. What had been an isolated, albeit terrible act in Cain became a philosophy of life. In Lamech, violence is a response to minor offenses and pride in the power to inflict harm. The divine protection given to Cain as an act of mercy is perversely transformed into an incentive for further violence. In contrast to this lineage, the narrative introduces another genealogy. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, for she said, "God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him." Genesis 4:25. The name Seth means appointed or substituted, marking him as Abel's spiritual successor. The contrast between the two lineages is highlighted in Genesis 4:26. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. While Cain's descendants developed technology, arts, and cities, Seth's descendants cultivated systematic worship. This spiritual division between the lineages would set the pattern for subsequent human history. Genesis 5 presents a surprising genealogy from Adam to Noah, notable for the extraordinary lifespans recorded. The pre-flood patriarchs lived an average of over 900 years, with Methuselah reaching the record of 969 years, the longest human lifespan in biblical history. This longevity could reflect different physical conditions in the pre-flood world, a greater temporal proximity to the original perfection of creation, or even a specific divine purpose in establishing the human race. Regardless of the explanation, these long lifespans allowed for a tremendous accumulation of knowledge and experience within individuals, as well as significant generational overlap. In the genealogy of Genesis 5, the repeated phrase, "lived years and died," serves as a constant reminder of the reality of death introduced by the fall. Even with extraordinarily long lifespans, the sentence of mortality remained in effect. Each patriarch, no matter how long he lived, eventually faced the return to dust. One character stands out as an exception to this pattern. Genesis 5:21-24 records, "Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah. After he fathered Methuselah, Enoch walked with God for 300 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. Unlike everyone else on the list, Enoch did not die. He was translated, taken directly into the divine presence. What set Enoch apart was his walk with God, the same phrase later used to describe Noah. This intimacy with the Creator, this alignment of wills and purposes, marks Enoch as an extraordinary example of faithfulness in an era of increasing corruption. His sudden disappearance must have made a profound impression on his contemporaries, signaling that communion with God transcends even the boundaries of physical death. Another notable patriarch is Methuselah, Enoch's son, whose name possibly means, "when he dies, it will come," potentially a prophecy, as the year of his death coincides with the year of the flood. His extraordinary lifespan, 969 years, demonstrates divine patience, extending the opportunity for repentance to the utmost before global judgment. This genealogy also establishes Noah as a direct descendant of Seth, in the lineage of faith, in contrast to the increasingly violent and materialistic families descending from Cain. By the time the narrative returns to Noah in Genesis 6, the genealogical context has already established his character as the spiritual heir of a tradition of communion with God. As the human population multiplied, so did wickedness exponentially. Genesis 6:1-2 introduces one of the most enigmatic episodes in the Bible. When mankind began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives whomever they chose. The identity of these sons of God has been debated for centuries. Traditional interpretations include 1. fallen angels who took on human form. 2. Tyrannical rulers who established harems. 3. Descendants of Seth who married women from Cain's lineage, thereby corrupting the separation between the faithful and the unfaithful families. Regardless of the specific interpretation, the result was catastrophic. The Lord saw that human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6:5. This description reveals not just external acts of violence or injustice, but a corruption of human intentionality itself. Thoughts, desires, and motivations perverted at their core. The divine response was profound sorrow. So the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was deeply grieved. Genesis 6:6. This divine regret does not indicate a change of mind due to error, but rather deep emotional pain over the perversion of his beloved creation. The anthropomorphic language conveys the gravity with which God regards human wickedness. The resulting divine decision was equally severe. Then the Lord said, "I will wipe mankind whom I created from the face of the earth, men and animals, creatures that move along the ground and birds of the sky, for I regret that I have made them." Genesis 6:7. The judgment would include not only the guilty humans, but the entire creation entrusted to their care, a reflection of the interconnectedness established from the beginning between humanity and nature. Amidst this scene of universal corruption, a single ray of hope emerges. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:8. This grace, unmerited favor, would be the foundation for the preservation of the human race. Noah is described as a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries, who, like Enoch before him, walked with God. Genesis 6:9. This description does not suggest moral perfection but relative integrity. In a world universally corrupted, Noah maintained a connection with the Creator and lived according to his principles. The subsequent story would demonstrate that even Noah had weaknesses and failures. His distinction lay in his receptivity to divine grace, not in self-sufficient merit. In response to universal corruption, God revealed to Noah his plan for judgment and salvation. Then God said to Noah, "I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of gopher wood." Genesis 6:13-14. The instructions for building the ark were meticulously specific. Gopher wood, possibly cypress, coated inside and out with pitch for waterproofing, with dimensions of 350 x 30 cubits, approximately 135 by 23 14 meters, 3 decks, a side door, and a window. These specifications produced a vessel not for navigation, but for flotation. Stability and capacity, not speed or maneuverability, were the priorities. The construction of this massive boat on dry land, possibly far from any large body of water, must have seemed like madness to Noah's contemporaries. Peter later referred to Noah as a preacher of righteousness, 2 Peter 2:5, suggesting that the long years of construction were accompanied by warnings about the coming judgment and calls for repentance, warnings that were universally ignored. Along with the construction instructions, God established a covenant with Noah. "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife, and your sons' wives with you." Genesis 6:18. This first explicit mention of a divine covenant in the Bible sets the pattern for future covenantal relationships between God and humanity. Divine initiative, human obedience, specific promises, and preservation amid judgment. The salvation extended to Noah was not only for him and his family, but also included representatives of the animal kingdom. Of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, Genesis 6:19. Clean animals suitable for sacrifice would enter in groups of 7 pairs, while unclean animals in only 1 pair. Provision both for the preservation of species and for future sacrificial worship. In response to these extraordinary instructions, Noah's obedience is emphasized. Thus Noah did. According to all that God commanded him, so he did. Genesis 6:22. This complete obedience stands in stark contrast to the universal rebellion of his contemporaries and serves as an example of active faith, not merely intellectual agreement, but concrete action based on trust in God's promises. When the construction was completed and the animals were gathered, God gave the final command. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation." Genesis 7:1. Noah's family entered the ark 7 days before the rain began, a final period of waiting and preparation before the catastrophe. Then came the flood. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis 7:11-12. The description suggests not only extraordinary rainfall, but also tectonic upheaval, releasing underground waters, a geological reshaping of the earth. The waters rose for 150 days, covering even the highest mountains. All terrestrial life that breathed outside the ark perished, a universal judgment against universal corruption. But amidst this devastation, a word of hope remains. Then God remembered Noah. Genesis 8:1. The verb remember does not imply that God had temporarily forgotten, but rather signifies special attention and action in favor of the object of his remembrance. The gradual recession of the waters, the ark's landing on the mountains of Ararat, the release of birds to test the conditions, and finally the drying of the earth. All this took more than a year. After more than a year inside the ark, the time had finally come to leave. Genesis 8:15-16 records, "Then God spoke to Noah, saying, 'Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you.'" The earth was dry, ready to be inhabited again. A renewed world awaited the family that God had preserved. Noah's first action demonstrated his devotion. Genesis 8:20 tells us, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar." Before building a house for his family, Noah built an altar for worship. This sacrifice acknowledged both divine mercy and the need for atonement for sin, which still persisted even in this new creation. God responded with a promise. Genesis 8:21-22 records, "I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease." God then formally established a covenant. Genesis 9:11 describes, "Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." As a sign, God placed the rainbow in the clouds, a visual symbol of the divine promise that each new generation could see and remember. The Noahic covenant included new instructions. First, the reaffirmation of the mission to populate the earth. Second, the permission to eat meat, with one important restriction. "But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood." Genesis 9:4. Finally, the first explicit law regarding homicide. "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. Genesis 9:6. This covenant established divine blessings extended to all humanity. The regularity of the seasons, diverse sources of food, and fundamental principles of justice that would enable civilization to develop in a world still affected by sin. Even Noah, a righteous man who walked with God, was not immune to failure. Genesis 9:20-21 reports, "And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent." This episode illustrates how even heroes of faith can have moments of weakness. The response of Noah's sons reveals fundamental differences in character. Genesis 9:22 tells us, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside." Ham's attitude suggests disrespect for the dignity of the patriarch. In contrast, Genesis 9:23 describes the response of Shem and Japheth. "But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness." Their approach demonstrates reverence and honor, even when their father was in a moment of weakness. When Noah learned of what had happened, his response was prophetic. Genesis 9:24-27 records, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant." Curiously, the curse fell upon Canaan, the son of Ham, possibly anticipating the character of the future Canaanites. This prophetic declaration would be fulfilled over generations when the Canaanites, descendants of Ham, were subdued by the Israelites, descendants of Shem. The blessings upon Shem and Japheth also had significant implications. The reference to the Lord, the God of Shem, anticipates the special role of the Semites in divine revelation. The blessing upon Japheth foresees the geographical expansion of his descendants, traditionally associated with Indo-European peoples. This seemingly simple episode established patterns that would reverberate throughout biblical history, demonstrating how attitudes of respect or disrespect toward authority have lasting consequences. Genesis 10 presents a systematic record of humanity's dispersion after the flood. This catalogue of Noah's descendants provides a framework for understanding the origins and relationships among the various peoples of the ancient world. The chapter begins. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood, Genesis 10:1. The narrative then systematically catalogues the descendants of each son. The descendants of Japheth, Genesis 10:2-5, are identified with the peoples who settled north and west of Mesopotamia, in Asia Minor, the Mediterranean islands, and Europe. Names such as Gomer, Madai, and Javan are associated with the Cimmerians, Medes, and Ionian Greeks, respectively. The descendants of Ham, Genesis 10:6-20, are primarily associated with Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and parts of the Middle East, including Canaan. The text gives special attention to Nimrod, Ham's grandson, describing him as a mighty hunter and the founder of major cities in Mesopotamia, including Babel and Nineveh. The Canaanites, descendants of Ham through Canaan, are described with specific geographical boundaries that define the land later promised to the Israelites, an important detail for the early readers of Genesis. Finally, the descendants of Shem, Genesis 10:21-31, are catalogued with emphasis on Eber, possibly the origin of the term Hebrews, and the ancestors of the Aramaic and Arab tribes. Shem's lineage was particularly significant as the ancestral line of Abraham and, consequently, the people of Israel. The chapter concludes, These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations in their nations. From these the nations spread across the earth after the flood. Genesis 10:32. This table of nations establishes the fundamental unity of the human race, all descending from Noah and ultimately from Adam. This genealogical catalogue served crucial purposes. It placed Israel within the broader context of the nations, provided a framework for understanding Israel's interactions with neighboring peoples, established the legitimacy of future Israelite conquests, and set the stage for the calling of Abraham, who would become a channel of blessing to all the families of the earth. While Genesis 10 provides an overview of human dispersion after the flood, Genesis 11 explains how and why this dispersion occurred. The narrative begins, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech." Genesis 11:1. This original linguistic unity facilitated unrestricted collaboration among all peoples. A significant group migrated eastward and settled in the plain of Shinar, Mesopotamia. There, their unity became the catalyst for an ambitious project. Genesis 11:4 recounts, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth." This project revealed problematic motivations. The tower, whose top reaches the heavens, suggests not only technological ambition, but possibly an attempt to attain divine status. The determination to make a name for ourselves reflects collective pride. Most revealing is the motivation, lest we be scattered, a direct rejection of the divine command to fill the earth. Genesis 9:1. The divine response is described in almost ironic terms. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men were building. Genesis 11:5. The image of God coming down to examine what humans considered their greatest achievement highlights the disparity between human ambition and divine reality. God's judgment expresses concern about the implications of a unified humanity. In rebellion, indeed the people are one and they all have one language. This is only the beginning. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. Genesis 11:6. The intervention aimed to limit the potential for coordinated evil. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they stopped building the city. Genesis 11:7-8. The introduction of multiple languages created communication barriers that fragmented human society. The name of the place, Babel, confusion, came to symbolize the futility of autonomous human ambition. However, the linguistic and geographical dispersion also contained mercy, preventing the consolidation of evil on a global scale and promoting the development of distinct cultures with unique contributions. Ironically, the builder's goal, "Let us make a name for ourselves," was indeed accomplished, but as a symbol of the failure of human pride before divine sovereignty. After Babel, the narrative shifts dramatically in focus, from all of humanity to a single family. This transition is facilitated by a genealogy in Genesis 11:10-32, tracing the lineage from Shem to Terah and his sons, including Abram, later called Abraham. The genealogy establishes Abram as a direct descendant of Shem, heir to the blessing pronounced by Noah, and part of the lineage that preserved some knowledge of the true God in an increasingly idolatrous world. Initially, Terah leads a family, migration from Ur of the Chaldeans toward Canaan, but the journey stops midway in Haran, where Terah dies. It is in this context, Abram, already 75 years old and settled in Haran, that the divine call occurs, changing the course of redemptive history. Genesis 12:1-3 records, "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" This calling required a threefold departure from his land, his people, and his father's household, essentially asking Abram to leave behind everything that provided identity and security in the ancient world. The promises encompass three main spheres: land, the land that I will show you; offspring, I will make you into a great nation, a significant promise considering that Sarai was barren; and blessing, both for Abram personally and through him, for all the families of the earth. This last promise is particularly notable in the post-Babel context. After humanity's dispersion, God initiated a process of reunification and restoration, not through a human project like the Tower, but through his own redemptive initiative, channeled through a chosen man. Abram's response is described with simplicity. "So Abram went as the Lord had told him," Genesis 12:4. Without recording any deliberation, the text simply presents Abram's obedience as immediate and complete, an extraordinary act of faith. As Hebrews 11:8 later comments, "By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going." In Canaan, Abram received further confirmation. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land," Genesis 12:7. The land that I will show you was now identified as Canaan, the same region inhabited by the descendants of Canaan, upon whom Noah's curse had been pronounced. Abram's response was to build an altar, the first of several he would establish at key points along his journey through Canaan. These altars were places of worship and territorial markers, symbolic affirmations of his descendants' future possession of the land. After his calling, Abraham's life was marked by physical journeys that mirrored his spiritual journey of faith. Upon arriving in Canaan, he did not settle permanently in one place, but traveled through the land, from Shechem to Bethel and then to the Negev. This pattern of movement, often accompanied by the building of altars, reflects Abraham's nature as a pilgrim, dwelling in the promised land, yet as a foreigner trusting in divine promises. Soon after his arrival, Abraham faced his first test. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Genesis 12:10. This crisis temporarily led him out of the promised land. Fearing for his safety, Abraham asked Sarai to present herself only as his sister, a half-truth that concealed their marital relationship. As expected, Sarai's beauty attracted aristocratic attention, and she was taken into Pharaoh's household. The situation became potentially catastrophic. The mother of the promised nation was now in Pharaoh's harem. However, God intervened. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. Genesis 12:17. After this episode, Abraham returned to Canaan and faced a familiar challenge when the land's limited resources created tension between his herdsmen and Lot's. With remarkable generosity and trust, Abraham offered Lot the first choice of territory. Lot chose the fertile plain of the Jordan, eventually settling in Sodom. Following this separation, God renewed his promise. "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever." Genesis 13:14-15. The promise now included specific details about the extent of the territory. Later, Abraham was drawn into a regional conflict when Mesopotamian kings attacked the cities of the plain and took Lot captive. Abraham mobilized his men, rescued Lot, and recovered the plundered goods. This episode introduced Melchizedek, the mysterious king-priest of Salem, who blessed Abraham and received a tithe from him. After these events, God formalized his covenant with Abraham through a solemn ritual involving divided animals and a flaming torch that passed between the pieces. Genesis 15:18 records, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates.'" This ceremony sealed the divine promises with a sacred and irrevocable commitment, with God alone assuming responsibility for fulfilling the covenant. These repeated confirmations of divine promises strengthened Abraham's faith throughout his long journey as a pilgrim in the land that would one day belong to his descendants. Abraham's family life revealed both his faith and his human frailties. The central challenge was the apparent impossibility of fulfilling the promise of numerous offspring, as Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. Genesis 16:1. After 10 years in Canaan with no sign of an heir, Sarai proposed, a culturally common solution of the time: "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Genesis 16:2. Abraham accepted this proposal, and Hagar, Sarai's Egyptian servant, conceived a child. The consequences were immediate and problematic. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Genesis 16:4. The relationship between the two women quickly deteriorated, with Sarai treating Hagar so harshly that the servant fled into the wilderness. There, an angel of the Lord found Hagar and instructed her to return and submit to Sarai, also promising, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." Genesis 16:10. Hagar returned and gave birth to Ishmael when Abraham was 86 years old. 13 years later, God appeared to Abraham again, reaffirming his covenant and introducing significant changes. First, names were changed. Abram, exalted father, became Abraham, father of multitudes, and Sarai became Sarah, both reflecting the promise of numerous descendants. Second, circumcision was instituted as a physical sign of the covenant, to be practiced by all males in Abraham's household. Third, and most astonishingly, God specifically promised that Sarah would bear a son within the following year, despite her old age. Abraham's initial reaction was one of disbelief. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" Genesis 17:17. He suggested that Ishmael be considered the heir to the promise, but God insisted, "Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him, an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Genesis 17:19. Shortly after, 3 mysterious visitors appeared to Abraham, and one of them, identified as the Lord himself, reaffirmed the promise of a son. Sarah, listening at the entrance of the tent, also laughed in disbelief, but was gently rebuked. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Genesis 18:14. As promised, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac when Abraham was 100 years old, and she was 90. The name Isaac, he laughs, immortalized the transformation of laughter from disbelief into joy. Sarah exclaimed, "God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me." In Genesis 21:6, however, the arrival of the promised son created new family tensions. During Isaac's weaning feast, Sarah saw Ishmael mocking him, which led her to demand, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." Genesis 21:10. Though painful for Abraham, this demand received divine approval, with the promise that God would also make Ishmael into a great nation. The ultimate test of Abraham's faith came when God asked the unthinkable, "Take your "Son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I shall show you." On Genesis 22:2. Without questioning, Abraham obeyed, prepared for the sacrifice, and was stopped at the last moment by divine intervention. This extraordinary event demonstrated both Abraham's absolute trust in God and God's rejection of human sacrifice. Instead, God provided a ram as a substitute, foreshadowing the principle of sacrificial substitution, which would become central to Israelite theology. This final test resulted in the most emphatic confirmation of the covenant. "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this. I will surely bless you, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed." Genesis 22:16-18. After Sarah's death, Abraham sought a wife for Isaac from his own relatives in Haran rather than among the Canaanites. His servant, providentially guided, found Rebekah at a local well and recognized her as God's chosen bride for Isaac. Genesis 24:67 describes the beginning of their marriage. Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Like Sarah before her, Rebekah was barren. Genesis 25:21 states, "Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord heard his prayer, and Rebekah conceived." However, the answer to prayer came with a complication. The children struggled together within her, Genesis 25-22. Seeking divine understanding, Rebekah received a crucial prophecy. "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Genesis 25:23. The twins were born with contrasting characteristics. Esau, the firstborn, was red and covered with hair like a garment, Genesis 25:25, while Jacob was born grasping his brother's heel. These physical differences foreshadowed differences in temperament and lifestyle. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents, Genesis 25:27. This contrast extended to parental favoritism. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob, Genesis 25:28. This division created fertile ground for future family conflicts. The first significant confrontation occurred when Esau, returning from the field exhausted, found Jacob cooking stew. Jacob took advantage of his brother's vulnerability. "Sell me your birthright now." Genesis 25:31. Esau, prioritizing immediate gratification over future blessings, replied, "Look, I am about to die. What good is my birthright to me?" Genesis 25:32. This reckless exchange revealed that Esau despised his birthright. Genesis 25:34. Years later, when Isaac was old and blind, he decided to give his final blessing to Esau. Rebekah, overhearing this plan and remembering the divine prophecy about her sons, orchestrated a deception. She disguised Jacob as Esau, prepared food resembling Isaac's favorite game, and instructed Jacob to present himself as the firstborn. The deception worked, and Isaac bestowed upon Jacob the blessing intended for Esau. "Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you." Genesis 27:29. When Esau discovered the deception, his reaction was one of bitter anguish. Esau cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." Genesis 27:34. Isaac, realizing the blessing's irreversibility, offered Esau a secondary blessing, foreseeing a life of struggle but eventual freedom from his brother's yoke. Esau then hated Jacob because of the blessing and vowed to kill him after Isaac's death. Aware of this threat, Rebekah arranged for Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran, ostensibly to find a wife, but in reality to save his life. Thus, the heir of the promise departed as a fugitive, leaving behind the comforts of home to face an uncertain future. This complex family narrative reveals how God fulfills his purposes, even through human failures, parental favoritism, exploitation of weakness, deliberate deception. None of these are condoned, yet all are incorporated into the unfolding of the divine plan foretold before the twins were born. Jacob's journey to Haran was marked by a divine encounter that transformed his spiritual understanding. At Bethel, during the night, he dreamed of a ladder set up on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Genesis 28:12. Above the ladder stood the Lord, who reaffirmed the Abrahamic covenant. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. Genesis 28:13. Waking up, Jacob recognized the uniqueness of the place. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Genesis 28:16. He set up a memorial pillar and made a vow, conditioned on divine care during his journey, a sign of emerging faith, still in its early stages compared to the mature trust he would develop later. Upon arriving in Haran, Jacob met Rachel, Laban's daughter, and immediately fell in love. He agreed to work 7 years to marry her, a period that seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Genesis 29:20. However, on the wedding night, Laban substituted Rachel with her older sister, Leah. When Jacob discovered the deception the next morning, Laban justified himself. It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Genesis 29:26. A significant irony, considering how Jacob had supplanted his own older brother. Jacob agreed to work another 7 years for Rachel, eventually marrying both sisters. Over time, through his wives and their maidservants, he fathered 11 sons and 1 daughter during his stay in Haran. These sons would become the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel, with Joseph later producing 2 tribes through his sons. After 20 years in Haran, Jacob decided to return to Canaan. His departure was complicated by Laban's reluctance to let him go, as he had greatly prospered through Jacob's work. Eventually, Jacob left secretly, and when Laban caught up with him, they established a non-aggression pact, marked by a heap of stones called Gilead, heap of witness. Jacob's most intimidating challenge was the impending reunion with Esau, who had sworn to kill him 20 years earlier. Sending messengers ahead, Jacob received alarming news that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. In fear, Jacob divided his group into 2 camps, so at least one might escape, sent substantial gifts to appease his brother, and then spent a memorable night wrestling with a mysterious visitor. Genesis 32:24-30 describes this transformative encounter. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have prevailed." This name change reflected an inner transformation from Jacob, supplanter, to Israel, he who struggles with God, or Prince of God. The deceiver who had obtained blessings through cunning now received a blessing directly after an honest struggle. Limping due to a hip injury sustained during the encounter, Jacob faced Esau, no longer relying solely on his own craftiness, but as one who had met God face to face. Surprisingly, the meeting with Esau was marked by reconciliation, not violence. Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Genesis 33:4. After this emotional reunion, the brothers went their separate ways, Esau returning to Seir, and Jacob settling first in Succoth and then in Shechem. Jacob's life in Canaan was marked by further trials: the rape of his daughter Dinah, the excessive vengeance of his sons against Shechem, the death of his beloved Rachel during Benjamin's birth, and Reuben's disgraceful behavior with Bilhah. However, he also experienced moments of spiritual renewal, such as his return to Bethel, where God reaffirmed the name change and covenant promises. Among Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph held a special place. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Genesis 37:3. This favoritism, combined with Joseph's dreams foretelling his future authority over the family, intensified his brothers' jealousy so that they could not speak peaceably to him. Genesis 37:4. Their hostility culminated when Joseph, sent by his father to check on his brothers, grazing the flocks far from home, was attacked by them. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns." Genesis 37:19-20. Reuben intervened to save Joseph's life by proposing that they throw him into a cistern alive, intending to secretly rescue him later. Before Reuben could carry out his plan, Judah suggested an alternative: selling Joseph to passing Ishmaelite merchants. For 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was sold and taken to Egypt. To cover up their crime, the brothers dipped Joseph's special robe in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, allowing him to conclude that his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, where he initially prospered. The Lord was with Joseph so that he became a successful man. His master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Genesis 39:2-3. This prosperity led Potiphar to appoint Joseph as the overseer of his entire household. Joseph's fortunes took a turn when Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce him. He consistently resisted, declaring, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. Rejected, she falsely accused him of attempted rape, resulting in his imprisonment. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Genesis 39:21. Who put him in charge of the other prisoners. There, Joseph interpreted the dreams of 2 of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. When his interpretations came true, the cupbearer's restoration and the baker's execution, Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him before Pharaoh. However, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. Genesis 40:23. 2 years later, when Pharaoh had troubling dreams that none of his magicians could interpret, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. Brought out of prison, Joseph told Pharaoh, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Genesis 41:16. He then interpreted the dreams as predicting 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine, and he recommended that Pharaoh appoint someone to oversee the storage of grain during the plentiful years. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him to this exact position. "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Genesis 41:41. At the age of 30, Joseph was transformed from a prisoner into the prime minister, receiving Pharaoh's signet ring, fine garments, a gold necklace, an official chariot, and an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. He was also given a wife from the aristocracy, Asenath, who bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. As Joseph had predicted, 7 years of great abundance were followed by a devastating famine that extended far beyond Egypt. When scarcity reached Canaan, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping only Benjamin, Rachel's other son, at home. In Egypt, the brothers did not recognize Joseph, who now appeared entirely Egyptian. in both appearance and position, but he recognized them. Without revealing his identity, Joseph tested them by accusing them of being spies and demanding that they bring their youngest brother as proof of their honesty. He kept Simeon as a hostage and secretly returned their money in their grain sacks. When the famine persisted, Jacob reluctantly allowed Benjamin to accompany his brothers to Egypt, with Judah offering himself as a guarantee for his safety. On their second visit, Joseph hosted his brothers for a meal in his home, becoming emotional upon seeing Benjamin. As a final test, he ordered that his silver cup be hidden in Benjamin's sack and then sent guards to discover the supposed theft. When Benjamin was seemingly caught stealing, Judah offered to stay as a slave in his place, explaining that losing another son of Rachel would surely kill their elderly father. This act of self-sacrifice demonstrated a transformation in the brothers' character, particularly in Judah, who years earlier had suggested selling Joseph. Moved by this development, Joseph finally revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." Genesis 45:4. Facing his brothers' shock and fear, he offered forgiveness and a providential interpretation of events. "Do not be distressed for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Genesis 45:5. Joseph then invited his entire family to live in Egypt under his protection for the remaining 5 years of famine. With Pharaoh's blessing, Jacob and his whole household, 70 people, migrated to Egypt and settled in the fertile region of Goshen. Jacob's reunion with his long-lost son was deeply emotional. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen your face and you are still alive." Genesis 46:30. The patriarch lived another 17 years in Egypt before passing away after blessing all his sons, especially Joseph's 2 sons, incorporating them as full-fledged tribes of Israel. Before his death, Jacob made Joseph promise to bury him not in Egypt, but in the family cave at Machpelah in Canaan. This promise, fulfilled with a massive funeral procession, underscored the conviction that despite their prosperity in Egypt, the true land of Israel was in Canaan, according to God's divine promise. Years later, when Joseph was also near death, he expressed the same conviction. "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Genesis 50:24. He then made his relatives swear that when God delivered them, they would carry his bones back to Canaan, an act of faith in God's promises, which would be fulfilled centuries later during the Exodus. Thus, the narrative of the patriarchs ends with Israel, the family, temporarily displaced from Israel, the land, yet with the firm conviction that God's promises remained valid and would one day be fully realized. The descendants of Jacob prospered tremendously in Egypt. Exodus 1:7 records, "The Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them." This extraordinary rate of growth fulfilled God's promise to make Abraham into a great nation. However, this prosperity triggered a hostile reaction. Exodus 1:8 marks the turning point. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. This Pharaoh, with no memory of Joseph's service, saw only a growing threat in the expanding Israelite population. His strategy was calculated oppression. Exodus 1:11 states, "So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor." The Israelites were subjected to harsh labor, building Pharaoh's supply cities. When this tactic failed, the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. Exodus 1:12. Pharaoh adopted extreme measures. First, he ordered Hebrew midwives to secretly kill all newborn boys. When they disobeyed, Pharaoh issued a public decree. "Every boy that is born, you must throw into the river." Exodus 1:22. It was in this context of genocide that Moses was born. Exodus 2:2 states, The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When hiding him was no longer possible, his mother devised a desperate plan. She got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Exodus 2:3. Providentially, Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and decided to save him. The child's sister, Miriam, suggested a Hebrew nurse, his own mother. Thus his mother was paid to nurse her own son, who would later be raised by Pharaoh's daughter. The princess named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Exodus 2:10. Moses grew up with extraordinary privileges, receiving an Egyptian education while retaining his Hebrew identity. At the age of 40, this internal conflict dramatically surfaced when Moses killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. When his act was discovered, he fled to Midian, where he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, and spent the next 40 years as a shepherd, a silent preparation for leading the people of Israel. After 4 decades in the wilderness, Moses' life followed an established pattern until an extraordinary encounter. Exodus 3:2 recounts, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. As Moses approached, God called him by name and demanded reverence. 'Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground.' Exodus 3:5. The divine message was direct. 'I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Therefore I have come down to deliver them.' Exodus 3:7-8. Then came Moses calling, 'Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out.' Exodus 3:10. Moses was reluctant, raising several objections. When he asked for God's name, he received a profound response, 'I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you.' Exodus 3:14. This name conveys self-existence and immutability. Even after this revelation, Moses continued to resist until God appointed Aaron, his brother, as his spokesperson. Upon returning to Egypt, Moses and Aaron gathered the elders of Israel, performed the divine signs, and delivered the message of deliverance. The people believed, but the initial confrontation with Pharaoh had devastating results. To the demand, "Let my people go," Exodus 5:1, Pharaoh responded with contempt, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Exodus 5:2. He imposed harsher labor conditions, requiring the same brick production without providing straw. This worsening oppression led the people to turn against Moses, who in turn cried out to God in anguish. The deliverer was learning that redemption would not come easily, and that even those being freed would respond with doubt. God answered Moses' plea with reassurance. "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand he will let them go." Exodus 6:1. The stage was set for an extraordinary display of divine power. The first plague came after Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites. Moses struck the waters of the Nile with his staff, and Exodus 7:20-21 records, "All the water in the river was turned to blood, the fish in the river died, and the river stank." This judgment targeted the Nile, which the Egyptians regarded as divine. When Pharaoh remained stubborn, a second plague followed. Frogs emerged from the Nile and overran Egypt. This plague struck Heket, the Egyptian goddess of fertility. Pharaoh begged for relief, promising to free Israel, but changed his mind once the plague ended. The third plague, lice or gnats infesting both humans and animals, came without warning. Pharaoh's magicians, who had previously replicated the signs, now failed and admitted, "This is the finger of God." Exodus 8:19. The fourth plague, swarms of flies, introduced an important distinction. I will make a difference between my people and your people. Exodus 8:23. The subsequent plagues would not affect the Israelites in Goshen. The fifth plague brought a deadly pestilence upon Egyptian livestock, directly impacting the Egyptian deities associated with animals. The sixth plague caused boils that broke out in sores on both man and beast. Exodus 9:10. The seventh plague, hail mixed with fire, was preceded by a warning to shelter people and animals. Some Egyptians feared the word of the Lord and took precautions. Others ignored the warning and suffered heavy losses. The eighth plague, locusts, that devoured all remaining vegetation, led even Pharaoh's own servants to plead for the Israelites' release. The ninth plague brought thick darkness for 3 days, while all the children of Israel had light. Exodus 10:23, a direct attack on Ra, the Egyptian sun god. When Pharaoh still refused to let the people go completely, the final plague, the death of all firstborn in Egypt, was announced. This plague would be a judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Exodus 12:12. Preparations for this plague introduced the Passover, a lamb for each household, its blood applied to the doorposts, and its meat eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. The blood was crucial. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. Exodus 12:13. At midnight, judgment struck as foretold. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not one dead. Exodus 12:30. Finally defeated, Pharaoh commanded, "Rise, go out from among my people." Exodus 12:31. The 10 plagues demonstrated that the God of Israel was superior to all the gods of Egypt, controlling every aspect of nature that the Egyptians attributed to various deities. The Israelites departed Egypt in haste. As instructed, they asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing, and they gave them what they requested. Exodus 12:35-36. This plunder represented compensation for centuries of forced labor. The Exodus involved an enormous number of people, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. Exodus 12:37. Including women and children, the total population likely exceeded 2 million. From the very beginning, God guided their journey. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, and by night in a pillar of fire. Exodus 13:21. This visible manifestation of the divine presence provided constant direction. Surprisingly, God did not lead them by the shortest route, but instead took them along a path that left them trapped between the sea and the pursuing Egyptian forces. Shortly after the Israelites' departure, Pharaoh mobilized his army to recapture them. Seeing the Egyptians approaching, the Israelites panicked. "Were there no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" Exodus 14:11. Moses responded with faith, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you." Exodus 14:13-14. What followed is one of the most dramatic divine interventions ever recorded. Exodus 14:21-22 describes, "Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." The Egyptians pursued Israel into the dry seabed, but God threw the Egyptian army into confusion. Exodus 14:24. Once Israel had safely crossed, the waters returned, covering the chariots and horsemen of Pharaoh's entire army. Exodus 14:28. This decisive victory demonstrated God's absolute power. Israel saw the great work that the Lord had done against the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed. Exodus 14:31. In response, Moses and the Israelites sang a song of celebration, and Miriam led the women with tambourines and dancing. This miraculous crossing became the defining event in Israel's national memory, repeatedly referenced as the ultimate demonstration of God's redeeming power. The euphoria of victory soon gave way to the practical challenges of life in the wilderness. Just 3 days after the crossing, they faced their first crisis. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water there because it was bitter. Exodus 15:23. The people turned against Moses, who cried out to God. Instructed to throw a piece of wood into the water, Moses made it drinkable. This first test established a pattern: crisis, complaint, divine intervention, and spiritual lesson. The next stop was Elim, with 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Exodus 15:27, a temporary oasis. Soon they faced another crisis when their supplies from Egypt ran out, leading to more complaints. God responded with 2 forms of provision. In the evening you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Exodus 16:12. Quails covered the camp at night, and in the morning manna appeared, small round flakes like frost on the ground. Exodus 16:14. This manna came with specific instructions. Gather only enough for each day, except on the 6th day, when they were to collect a double portion for the Sabbath. These rules taught daily dependence on God and the observance of the Sabbath. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they reached the inhabited land. Exodus 16:35. At Rephidim, they faced another water crisis. God instructed Moses to strike a rock with his staff, and water flowed abundantly. Also at Rephidim, they encountered their first military challenge when the Amalekites attacked. During the battle, led by Joshua, Moses had to keep his hands raised for Israel to prevail. When he grew tired, Aaron and Hur supported his hands until sunset, ensuring victory over the Amalekites. This episode illustrated the combination of human effort and divine dependence. Finally, before reaching Sinai, Israel received a visit from Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who offered wise administrative advice. Seeing Moses overwhelmed by judging the people's disputes, Jethro suggested delegating authority to judges over groups of varying sizes. Moses implemented this system, allowing for more efficient governance during their wilderness journey. In the 3rd month after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and camped before the mountain. Exodus 19:3-4 records, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "This is what you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." This prelude established the foundation for God's covenant proposal, not based on Israel's merits, but on God's grace and power, demonstrated in their deliverance from Egypt. The divine proposal followed. "Now, if you will diligently listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my treasured possession among all peoples. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Exodus 19:5-6. This offer presented a special relationship with a dual purpose. Israel would be both God's treasured possession, exclusive relationship, and a kingdom of priests, a mediating role between God and the nations. This covenant did not annul the previous promise to Abraham, but provided the framework for its fulfillment. The people's response was unanimous. "Everything the Lord has spoken, we will do." Exodus 19:8. This immediate acceptance, though sincere, at the moment would be tested repeatedly in the days and years to come. With the covenant preliminarily accepted, preparations began for the formal divine revelation. Moses instructed the people to consecrate themselves for 2 days, washing their clothes and abstaining from sexual relations. Boundaries were set. Around the mountain, beware of going up the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain will be put to death. Exodus 19:12. This separation emphasized God's holiness and the necessity of reverent approach. On the third day, the divine manifestation was awe-inspiring. Exodus 19:16-19 describes, "On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. The whole Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. This theophany, a visible manifestation of God, conveyed both majesty and fear. The people trembled and stood at a distance." Exodus 20:18, recognizing God's transcendence. From this dramatic setting, God delivered the Ten Commandments, which would form the core of the covenant. The Ten Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, represent the moral foundation of the Sinai covenant, recorded in Exodus 20:2-17 and reiterated in Deuteronomy 5:6-21. These fundamental principles shape the relationship between God and Israel. The Decalogue begins with a historical prologue. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." Exodus 22. This crucial introduction establishes that the commandments are not arbitrary demands, but a fitting response to a God who has already demonstrated grace and deliverance. Obedience was to be motivated by gratitude, not merely fear. The commandments can be divided into two main categories. The first four regulate the relationship with God, while the last six govern human relationships. The first commandment establishes exclusivity. "You shall have no other gods before me." Exodus 23. In the context of prevailing polytheism, this requirement of monolatry, exclusive worship, even without denying the existence of other gods, was revolutionary. Eventually, this exclusivity would evolve into full monotheism, the assertion that other gods simply do not exist. The second commandment prohibits worship images. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image." Exodus 24. This prohibition radically distinguished Israel from neighboring cultures, where idols and divine representations were central to worship. It prevented both the degradation of the concept of divinity and the temptation to manipulate God through magical practices. The third commandment safeguards the divine name. "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." Exodus 27. Beyond forbidding perjury and blasphemy, this commandment demanded reverence for God's character and reputation. His name represented His revealed essence. The fourth commandment commands Sabbath observance. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Exodus 28. This weekly rest had multiple dimensions. It commemorated creation, Exodus 20:11, reminded the people of their deliverance from slavery, Deuteronomy 5:15, provided necessary physical rest, and established a balanced rhythm between work and worship. The fifth commandment requires honoring parents. "Honor your father and your mother." Exodus 20:12. As the only commandment with a specific promise, "so that your days may be long," this obligation established a family order that underpinned the entire social structure. Respect for parental authority was essential for the transmission of values and traditions. The sixth commandment protects human life. "You shall not murder." Exodus 20:13. This prohibition against unlawful killing was based on the unique value of human life as bearing the divine image. It did not forbid all forms of taking life, such as judicial execution or defensive war, but established the sanctity of life as a fundamental principle. The seventh commandment protects marriage. "You shall not commit adultery." Exodus 20:14. This commandment safeguarded the institution of marriage, essential for family and social stability. Its central position among the 10 reflects the fundamental importance of the family within the covenant community. The 8th commandment protects property. You shall not steal. Exodus 20:15. Recognizing the right to private property, this prohibition laid the foundation for fair economic relationships and respect for personal boundaries. The 9th commandment protects truth. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Exodus 20:16. Although its immediate context is judicial, the principle extends to all honest communication. Truth was essential for communal trust and the administration of justice. The 10th commandment regulates inner desire. You shall not covet. Exodus 20:17. Going beyond external actions, this commandment reaches motivations and attitudes. It acknowledges that disordered desires are the root of behavioral violations, and that true righteousness includes inner purity. These fundamental principles were unique among ancient legal codes for their brevity, simplicity, and concern for inner motives. They provided a moral framework that would be elaborated into hundreds of specific laws and later summarized by Jesus in the dual commandment to love God and neighbor. After the presentation of the Decalogue, Moses received additional laws that applied the core principles to specific situations. This expanded set of regulations, Exodus 20:22-23:33, known as the Book of the Covenant, covered 3 main categories: civil, criminal, and ceremonial laws. The civil laws regulated aspects such as slavery, with humanitarian protections uncommon. For the time, liability for damages, loans, and the treatment of foreigners, widows, and orphans. Notably, these laws often displayed compassion beyond contemporary norms, as seen in Exodus 22:26-27. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. What? Will he sleep in? And when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am compassionate. The criminal laws established punishments for various offenses, incorporating the principle of proportional retribution, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Exodus 21:4. Far from promoting vengeance, this principle actually limited excessive retaliation, ensuring that punishment did not exceed the crime. The ceremonial laws covered worship, festivals, first fruits, and tithes. They prohibited idolatrous practices from neighboring nations and established 3 major annual feasts where all men were to appear before the Lord. After receiving these laws, Moses led a solemn ceremony to formally ratify the covenant. Exodus 24:4-8 describes, Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and rising early in the morning, he built an altar at the base of the mountain and 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, Here is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you according to all these words. This ritual followed the pattern of covenant ceremonies in the ancient Near East. With significant elements, the written record established clear terms. The altar and 12 pillars represented the parties in the agreement. The sacrifices symbolized commitment unto death, and the blood sprinkled on both the people and the altar created a shared bond. The phrase, blood of the covenant, highlighted the gravity of this mutual commitment. Following this ratification, an extraordinary covenant meal took place. Exodus 24:9-11 recounts, Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, as clear as the sky itself. They gazed upon God, and they ate and drank. This table fellowship symbolized peace and acceptance, visually confirming the restored relationship between God and Israel's representatives. After this meal, Moses was called to ascend further up the mountain to receive additional instructions. Exodus 24:12 explains, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain and stay there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction.'" Accompanied by Joshua part of the way, Moses entered the cloud covering the mountain and remained there for 40 days and 40 nights. During this period, Moses received detailed instructions for the tabernacle, the portable center of worship where God would dwell among his people. This extension of the Sinai revelation was crucial in establishing appropriate standards for divine worship in the wilderness. Moses' prolonged absence created anxiety among the people. Exodus 32:1 records, "When the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said to him, 'Get up, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.'" This impatience revealed how superficially Israel had understood the first and second commandments, which they had received just weeks earlier. Their demand for visible gods showed an attachment to Egyptian religious patterns and a fear of apparent abandonment by their leader. Surprisingly, Aaron gave in easily. Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold earrings and bring them to me." He took what they handed him, made it into a cast calf. Exodus 32:2-4. This calf, or young bull, likely did not represent another God, but rather an image of Yahweh himself, as suggested by Aaron's declaration, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Exodus 32:4. This made the transgression more subtle. It was not a complete rejection of YHWH for other deities, but an attempt to worship YHWH through forbidden images, possibly following Egyptian models like the Apis bull. Aaron even tried to legitimize this syncretistic practice by proclaiming, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord," Exodus 32:5. God's response was immediate and severe. He informed Moses, "Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have made for themselves a cast calf and have worshipped it." Exodus 32:7-8. Notably, God referred to Israel as your people, Moses' people, rather than my people, signaling a rupture in the covenant relationship. God proposed total destruction and a fresh start through Moses. "Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." Exodus 32:10. This proposal tested Moses' character and offered him a status comparable to Abraham. Moses' response demonstrated true intercessory leadership. He appealed to three considerations: God's reputation among the nations, what will the Egyptians say? The promises made to the patriarchs, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and God's gracious character. Exodus 32:14 records the result. "Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened." As he descended the mountain and personally witnessed the idolatry, Moses expressed righteous anger by breaking the tablets of the law, a symbolic act indicating that Israel had broken the newly established covenant. He destroyed the golden calf, ground it into powder, mixed it with water, and made the Israelites drink it, demonstrating the idol's futility. When confronted, Aaron gave a weak excuse, suggesting that the calf had emerged almost spontaneously. "I threw the gold into the fire and out came this calf," Exodus 32:24. His evasion of responsibility stood in stark contrast to Moses' decisive leadership. Judgment followed when Moses asked, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." Exodus 32:26. The tribe of Levi rallied to him and executed about 3,000 men, likely the chief instigators of the idolatry. This severe action established a precedent for Israel. Violations of the covenant would have grave consequences. Moses then returned to the mountain, offering himself as a substitute. This people has committed a great sin, but if not, forgive them. Please erase me from the book you have written. Exodus 32:31-32. God rejected this offer, maintaining the principle of individual responsibility, but agreed to uphold the covenant, though with lasting consequences. This traumatic episode taught enduring lessons, how easily God's people could revert to previous cultural patterns, the danger of creating physical representations of divinity, the seriousness of the covenant, and the importance of faithful leadership in times of spiritual crisis. Following the golden calf crisis, God renewed the covenant and provided extensive details for the construction of the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where he would dwell among his people. Exodus 25:8 explains its fundamental purpose. "And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." This elaborate project included a large outer courtyard containing a rectangular tent, tabernacle, divided into two spaces, the holy place and the most holy place. The most holy place contained only the Ark of the Covenant, a gold-covered chest, holding the tablets of the law, a jar of manna, and later Aaron's staff that budded. Above the Ark was the atonement cover, where the blood of atonement would be sprinkled annually. The holy place contained 3 items: the altar of incense, symbolizing prayers rising to God, the table of showbread, representing divine provision and fellowship, and the 7-branched lampstand, providing light and symbolizing spiritual illumination. The outer courtyard contained the bronze basin for ritual purification and the altar of burnt offerings for sacrifices. The entire complex used precious materials, gold, silver, bronze, fine fabrics, and special wood, arranged in a decreasing pattern of value as one moved away from the most holy place, symbolizing the gradual approach to God's presence. These materials were to come from voluntary offerings. Exodus 25:2 records, "Speak to the Israelites and have them bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering from everyone whose heart prompts them to give." The response was extraordinary. Everyone whose heart was moved and whose spirit was willing came forward. Exodus 35:21. Eventually, the contributions were so generous that the people had to be told to stop bringing materials. For the construction, God appointed specific artisans. "See, I have called by name Bezalel, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge in all kinds of craftsmanship." Exodus 31:2-3. This is the first biblical account of someone being filled with the Spirit, notably for artistic and technical work, rather than just prophecy or leadership. When the tabernacle was completed exactly 1 year after the Exodus, divine glory visibly descended. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Exodus 40:34. This tangible manifestation confirmed God's acceptance of the work and provided ongoing evidence of his presence among his people. The tabernacle would serve as the center of Israelite worship for centuries until it was replaced by Solomon's permanent temple. More importantly, it established theological patterns that permeate the entire Bible: the tension between transcendence, God beyond creation, and immanence, God present within creation, the problem of human sin, which prevents direct access to God, the need for sacrificial mediation to restore communion, and God's desire to dwell among his people, a theme that would culminate in the incarnation of Christ. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in the Church. The Sinai covenant, with its moral commandments, ritual structures, and physical sanctuary, provided the framework for the ongoing relationship between God and Israel. Although frequently broken by the people, this covenant established standards of holiness and devotion that shaped Israelite identity and paved the way for the new covenant that would come through Christ. After spending nearly a year camped at the base of Mount Sinai, where they received the law and built the tabernacle, the Israelites needed to organize for their journey to the Promised Land. God commanded a detailed census of the population. Numbers 1.2-3 records take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to count those who are 20 years old or more who are able to serve in the army of Israel. This census identified 603,550 men fit for war, excluding women, children, the elderly, and the Levites. The count served both military preparation and community organization. The Levites, set apart for religious service, were counted separately. Numbers 3:15 explains, count the Levites by their families and clans. Count every male a month old or more. The total was 22,000 Levites, consecrated to replace the firstborn of the other tribes in sacred service. The camp was arranged in an orderly pattern, with the tabernacle at the center. Numbers 2.2 describes, the Israelites are to camp around the tent of meeting, some distance from it, each of them under their standard and holding the banners of their family. 3 tribes camped on each side of the tabernacle with the banners. Of Judah, east; Reuben, south; Ephraim, west; and Dan, north, serving as the primary markers. This arrangement conveyed important theological truths. God literally dwelled at the center of the community. The organization reflected both tribal unity and diversity, and the cross-shaped layout symbolically foreshadowed the ultimate means by which God would dwell permanently among his people. The movement of the camp was supernaturally guided, Numbers 9:17-18 explains. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the Israelites encamped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command, they encamped. After receiving detailed instructions, including the use of silver trumpets for different types of convocations, and completing all necessary preparations, the time to depart finally arrived. Numbers 10:11-12 records, on the 20th day of the 2nd month of the 2nd year, the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle of the covenant law. Then the Israelites set out from the desert of Sinai and traveled from place to place until the cloud came to rest in the desert of Paran. The order of the march was carefully planned. First, Judah and its associated tribes, followed by the Levites carrying the disassembled tabernacle, and so on. This organized departure marked the beginning of a journey they hoped would soon end with their entry into the Promised Land. It didn't take long for complaints to replace obedience. Numbers 11.1 states, now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. This event gave the place the name Taberah, burning, and established a pattern that would repeat frequently: complaint, divine judgment, a cry to Moses, and intercession bringing relief. Soon, another complaint arose, this time about food. Numbers 11:4-6 describes, the rabble with them began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. This ingratitude for the manna, the miraculous bread provided daily, revealed a deep spiritual problem, an idealized view of their past enslavement and a disregard for God's present provision. The complaint overwhelmed Moses, who expressed his own despair to God. Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? Numbers 11:11. God responded in 2 ways. First, by distributing the spirit that was upon Moses to 70 elders to assist in leadership. Second, by promising so much meat that it would become repulsive. The Lord will give you meat and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day or 2 days or 5, 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month. Numbers 11:18-20. The meat arrived in the form of quail that were scattered all around the camp to a depth of about 3 feet, as far as a day's walk in any direction. Numbers 11:31. However, while they were still eating, many were struck by a severe plague. While the meat was still between their teeth and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Numbers 11:33. The place was named Kibroth Hattava, graves of craving, marking the deadly cost of unrestrained desire. Another murmuring arose, this time from Moses' own family. Numbers 12:1-2 records, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. They said, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us?" This criticism combined ethnic prejudice against Moses' wife with envy of his unique prophetic authority. The divine response was swift. After summoning the 3 siblings to the tabernacle, God defended Moses, emphasizing his singular position. "With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord." Numbers 12:8. Miriam was struck with leprosy, though after Moses' intercession, her condition was temporary. "Let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and afterward she may be received again." Numbers 12:14. These episodes of murmuring, though distinct, shared common characteristics: ingratitude for divine blessings, a desire to return to Egypt, questioning of God's established leadership, and divine judgment tempered by mercy through intercession. Finally, Israel reached the southern border of Canaan. They were in Kadesh Barnea, only a few days' journey from the Promised Land. At the people's suggestion and with divine approval, 12 spies, 1 from each tribe, were sent to scout the land. Numbers 13:2 records, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, each one a leader among them." After 40 days of exploring Canaan, the spies returned with evidence of the land's fertility, a cluster of grapes so large that 2 men carried it on a pole. Numbers 13:23. Their report confirmed the divine promise. "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Numbers 13:27. However, 10 of the 12 spies added a negative assessment. "But the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. We are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we." Numbers 13:28-31. Only Caleb and Joshua maintained a perspective of faith. "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." Numbers 13:30. The community chose to believe the pessimistic report, resulting in collective panic. Numbers 14:1-4 describes, "Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. And they said to one another, 'Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt.'" This proposal represented a total rejection of both Moses' leadership and God's promise. Joshua and Caleb tried to change public opinion, reminding them, "If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land." Numbers 14:8-9. Their reward for this faithfulness? The whole congregation said to stone them. Numbers 14:10. The divine intervention was immediate and severe. "How long will this people reject me, and how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them." Numbers 14:11-12. Only Moses' passionate intercession, appealing to God's reputation among the nations, prevented total destruction. Nevertheless, severe consequences remained. God swore, "None of the men who have seen my glory and my signs shall see the land, but your children whom you said would be victims I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised." Numbers 14:21-23:31. The specific sentence was clear. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. Numbers 14:34. The 10 pessimistic spies died immediately by plague, while the Israelites, attempting to remedy their mistake, advanced against the Canaanites despite Moses' warning. Numbers 14:45 records the outcome. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that mountain came down and attacked them and drove them back as far as Hormah. This defeat sealed the fate of the first generation, condemned to wander in the wilderness until all the adults responsible for the rebellion had perished. The crisis at Kadesh Barnea was a turning point in Israel's history. At the threshold of the promised blessing, the community chose fear over faith, human assurance over divine promise. The result was a nearly 4-decade delay in entering the land, an entire generation lost due to lack of faith. The following years witnessed increasing challenges to the established leadership. The most significant was led by Korah, a Levite, along with Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben. Numbers 16.13 records. Korah, along with Dathan and Abiram and On, took men, and they rose up before Moses, 250 leaders of the congregation, and they gathered together against Moses and Aaron, and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the congregation of the Lord?" This challenge involved 2 distinct disputes. Korah, as a Levite, questioned Aaron's exclusive priesthood, while Dathan and Abiram, as Reubenites, likely resented the loss of their tribe's birthright, originally belonging to Reuben, to Moses' civil leadership. United, they posed a complete threat to the divinely established authority structure. Moses proposed a public test. All aspiring priests were to bring censers with fire and incense before the Lord. Meanwhile, Moses confronted Dathan and Abiram, who refused to appear, accusing him, "Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should also keep acting like a prince over us?" Numbers 16:13. Their characterization of Egypt, a land of slavery, as a land flowing with milk and honey, revealed their complete distortion of reality. For the Reubenite leaders, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households, along with all Korah's men and all their possessions. Numbers 16:32. For the 250 aspiring priests, fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Numbers 16:35. Surprisingly, the next day, the congregation blamed Moses and Aaron for the deaths. "You have killed the Lord's people." Numbers 16:41. This unjust accusation provoked another divine manifestation, a plague that began consuming the people. Under Moses' direction, Aaron ran through the camp with incense to make atonement. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague stopped. Numbers 16:48. Even so, 14,700 people perished. To settle the priesthood matter definitively, God ordered an additional test. Each tribe was to present a staff with its name inscribed. Numbers 17.5 explains, "The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout." The next day, Aaron's staff not only budded, but also produced blossoms, sprouted shoots, and bore almonds. Numbers 17:8. This miraculous confirmation of the Aaronic priesthood was preserved in the Ark as a permanent memorial. Years later, near the end of the wilderness journey, even Moses and Aaron failed at a critical moment. At Meribah, when the people once again complained about the lack of water, God instructed Moses, "Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water." Numbers 28. Instead, Moses, exasperated, exclaimed, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Numbers 20:10. And struck the rock twice with his staff. Although water gushed out abundantly, God judged this action as a failure of trust. "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Numbers 20:12. Moses' precise failure included disobedience, striking instead of speaking, inappropriate anger, and possibly attributing the miracle to himself rather than to God. This sentence ensured that the conquest of Canaan would be led by a new generation under new leadership. As the 40 years came to a close and Israel neared the Promised Land, they faced several final challenges. First, the Edomites, descendants of Esau, refused them passage through their territory. Numbers 20:21 records, "But he said, 'You may not pass through.' And Edom came out against them with a large army and a strong hand. Thus, Edom refused to let Israel pass through its territory, so Israel turned away from him. This refusal forced a lengthy detour, during which Aaron died on Mount Hor. Numbers 20:28 describes the transition of priestly leadership. Moses removed Aaron's garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there on top of the mountain. The prolonged detour increased the people's discouragement, and once again they spoke against God and against Moses. Numbers 21:5. In response, the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. Numbers 21:6. When the people repented, God provided an unusual remedy. Make a fiery serpent and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten and looks at it will live. Numbers 21:8. This bronze serpent, though later turned into an object of idolatrous worship, destroyed by King Hezekiah centuries later, served as a powerful theological symbol. Jesus later referenced it as a foreshadowing of his own crucifixion. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. John 3:14-15. Approaching Canaan from the east, Israel secured significant victories over Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, establishing a presence in the Transjordan. These victories alarmed Balak, king of Moab, who hired Balaam, a renowned seer, to curse Israel. After an extraordinary episode involving a talking donkey, Balaam found it impossible to curse those whom God had blessed, declaring, "I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot change it." Numbers 23:20. Frustrated by his failed direct approach, Balaam seemingly advised a more subtle strategy: religious and moral seduction. Numbers 25:1-3 recounts, "While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meals and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. This episode posed a greater threat than military opposition: the compromise with foreign gods through sexual immorality. The judgment was severe, public, execution of the leaders, and a plague that killed 24,000 Israelites. The plague only ceased when Phinehas, Aaron's grandson, took decisive action against an Israelite man and his Midianite partner who openly defied the sanctity of the camp. These final wilderness experiences served as crucial preparation for the challenges of Canaan. Israel learned that their enemies would use both military force and cultural seduction, and that victory would depend as much on spiritual faithfulness as on military strategy. The new generation, shaped by their parents' failures, was now ready to enter the land under new leadership. As the wilderness journey neared its end, God commanded a second census in the plains of Moab. Numbers 26.2 records, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community, from 20 years old and upward, by their ancestral houses, all who are able to serve in Israel's army." The total was 601,130 men fit for war, remarkably similar to the first census, 603,550, taken nearly 40 years earlier. However, Numbers 26, 64, 65 notes, "Not one of them was among those counted by Moses and Aaron, for the Lord had told them they would surely die in the wilderness. Not one was left except Caleb and Joshua." The numerical similarity concealed a complete generational replacement. A new generation had taken the place of the old. This second census served multiple purposes: military preparation for the imminent conquest, a basis for territorial distribution in Canaan, and a demonstration of both divine judgment, the death of the first generation, and divine provision, the sustained growth of the population. Several important administrative and legal matters were resolved during this period. A significant issue arose when the daughters of Zelophehad, whose father had died without male heirs, approached Moses. "Our father died in the wilderness, and he had no sons. Why should our father's name be removed from among his family because he had no sons? Give us a possession among our father's brothers." Numbers 27:3-4. This petition raised an important question regarding inheritance rights for women. After consulting the Lord, Moses established a legal precedent. The tribe of the sons of Joseph speaks what is right. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them be married to whomever they think best, only they must marry within the family of their father's tribe. Numbers 36:5-6. This decision ensured both the inheritance rights of daughters and the preservation of land within the original tribes. Another crucial matter involved the request from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh to settle in the Transjordan, territory recently conquered from Sihon and Og. Initially, Moses interpreted this request as a repetition of the rebellion. At Kadesh Barnea, "Shall your brothers go to war while you sit here?" Numbers 32:6. The tribes clarified that they had no intention of abandoning their brothers and proposed a compromise. "We will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities, for our little ones. But we ourselves will be armed, ready to go before the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place." Numbers 32:16-17. Moses accepted this proposal, but issued a solemn warning about the consequences of breaking their promise. Moses also established 6 cities of refuge, 3 in the Transjordan and 3 in Canaan, where individuals who had committed unintentional manslaughter could find protection from revenge until a proper trial was conducted. Numbers 35:11-12 explains, "You shall designate cities to serve as cities of refuge, so that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. These cities shall be a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment." Additionally, 48 cities were designated for the Levites, who would not receive a tribal land inheritance. These cities, distributed among all the tribes, enabled the Levites to fulfill their role as teachers of the law throughout the nation. These administrative, legal, and territorial preparations demonstrated the transition of the Israelites from a nomadic desert community to an established nation in the Promised Land, with civil and religious institutions suitable for this new phase of their existence. As the death of Moses approached, the question of succession became crucial. Moses took the initiative, asking God, "May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over this congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep without a shepherd. Numbers 27:16-17. God's response was clear. Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Present him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. Numbers 27:18-19. Joshua had already demonstrated leadership qualifications as Moses' assistant, Exodus 24:13, a military commander against Amalek, Exodus 17:9-14, and one of the two faithful spies, Numbers 14:6-9. The transfer of authority was a public and significant ceremony. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and presented him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. He laid his hands on him and commissioned him. Numbers 27:22-23. The laying on of hands symbolized the transfer of authority and the spirit of wisdom necessary for leadership, Deuteronomy 34:9. However, Joshua would not receive the same level of authority as Moses. While Moses spoke with God face to face, Deuteronomy 34:10, Joshua was to stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. Numbers 27:21. This distinction preserved the unique status of Moses as the covenant mediator and an unparalleled prophet. The carefully planned transition ensured leadership continuity while recognizing the uniqueness of Moses' role. Joshua would primarily serve as a military and civil leader during the conquest phase, rather than as a direct recipient of divine revelation like his predecessor. This clear distinction helped Israel uphold the Mosaic teachings even after Moses' death. The book of Deuteronomy consists mainly of Moses' final speeches delivered on the plains of Moab. Deuteronomy 1:1-3 situates the setting. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month. The term Deuteronomy means second law, not a new set of laws, but rather a recap and application of the covenant for the new generation about to enter the land. The first speech begins with a historical review of the journey from Sinai, emphasizing both divine care and Israel's failures. Deuteronomy 1:30-32 exemplifies this dual theme. The Lord your God, who goes before you, will fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness, where you have seen how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son. Yet in spite of this, you did not believe the Lord your God. This honest summary served two purposes: to teach the new generation through the mistakes of their ancestors, and to emphasize that the imminent entry into Canaan was a result of divine faithfulness, not human merit. Deuteronomy 4:37-38 underscores this: because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them, driving out nations before you, greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance. Moses then reaffirmed the foundations of the covenant, beginning with a recitation of the Decalogue, Deuteronomy 5:6-21. Significantly, while the first account of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 grounds the Sabbath in creation, this version connects it to the deliverance from Egypt. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day, Deuteronomy 5:15. This emphasis on the redemptive experience as the basis for obedience culminates in the famous Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Deuteronomy 6:4-5. This commandment of total love stands in stark contrast to mechanical obedience, establishing a heart-based relationship as the essence of the covenant. Moses repeatedly emphasized the need for separation from Canaanite practices. Deuteronomy 7:2-4 commands, "When the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods." This requirement of separation was not based on Israelite superiority. Deuteronomy 7:7-8 clarifies, "The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more numerous, but because the Lord loved you." This election by grace, rather than merit, would be a constant theme in Israelite theology. Moses warned against the danger of prosperity leading to forgetfulness of God. "When you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God, lest when you have eaten and are full, your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God." Deuteronomy 8:10-14. This prophetic warning anticipated the human tendency to replace gratitude with arrogance when circumstances improve. The first discourse also emphasized the importance of continuous instruction in the law. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 commands, "These words shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." This emphasis on ongoing education ensured that the next generation would not repeat the mistakes of the previous one. Moses' second great discourse focused on the formal renewal of the covenant for the generation that would enter Canaan. Deuteronomy 29:1 introduces, "These are the words of the covenant, which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb." This renewal addressed a critical need. The generation that had experienced the Exodus and Sinai had died. Their children needed to personally affirm the covenant. Moses emphasized the comprehensive nature of this commitment. "All of you stand today before the Lord your God, that you may enter into covenant with the Lord, that he may establish you today as his people, and that he may be your God." Deuteronomy 29:10-13. A crucial component of this renewal was a detailed exposition of the blessings for obedience. Deuteronomy 28:1-14, and curses for disobedience, Deuteronomy 28:15-68. The curses, significantly more extensive, included a prophetic foreshadowing of future exiles. "The Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other," Deuteronomy 28:64. Despite these severe warnings, Moses offered hope beyond judgment. Deuteronomy 30:1-3 foresees, "When all these things come upon you, and you return to the Lord your God, then the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the nations." This prophecy of post-exilic restoration laid the theological foundation for national hope even in Israel's darkest periods. In concluding this discourse, Moses presented a fundamental choice. "I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life." Deuteronomy 30:19. This presentation of the conditional covenant clarified that future consequences would depend on present choices. Moses also reassured the people about the accessibility of the law. "This commandment is not hidden from you, nor is it far off, but the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart." Deuteronomy 30:11-14. Obedience did not require extraordinary abilities, only a sincere commitment to the already revealed commandments. Complementing these discourses, Moses composed a prophetic song, Deuteronomy 32, as a witness against Israel, Deuteronomy 31:19. This poetic composition, meant to be memorized, anticipated future apostasy and subsequent judgment, preserving divine justice for future generations. Moses' final public act was to bless the tribes of Israel, Deuteronomy 33, similar to Jacob's blessings before his death. Deuteronomy 33:1 introduces, "Now this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death." Unlike Jacob's blessings, which included harsh critiques of some sons, Moses' blessings were uniformly positive, offering encouragement for the challenges ahead. Beginning with a declaration of divine majesty, Moses blessed each tribe individually, reflecting their characteristics and future roles. He concluded with a general affirmation of Israel's uniqueness. "Happy are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, the shield of your help and the sword of your majesty." Deuteronomy 33:29. After these blessings, Moses ascended Mount Nebo as commanded by God. Deuteronomy 34:14 recounts, "Then Moses went up to the top of Pisgah, and the Lord showed him all the land. And the Lord said to him, 'This is the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there.'" The opportunity to behold the promised land, even without entering it, represented a significant grace. Moses, whose life's hope had been to lead Israel into Canaan, was granted a glimpse of the fulfillment of God's promise before his death. Deuteronomy 34:5-6 records his passing. "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and he buried him in a valley. But to this day, no one knows the location of his grave." This mysterious burial was possibly intended to prevent the worship of his tomb, an inappropriate tribute to a man who dedicated his life to leading worship exclusively to God. Moses passed away with remarkable vigor. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor had his strength faded. Deuteronomy 34:7. This observation suggests that his death was determined by divine purpose rather than natural physical decline. Israel observed the traditional mourning period. The children of Israel wept for Moses for 30 days. Deuteronomy 34:8. This period marked the emotional transition between eras defined by different leaders. The true measure of Moses' greatness is offered in the divine epitaph. "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and wonders, and in all the mighty power and all the great and terrible deeds which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel." Deuteronomy 34:10-12. This uniqueness would be recognized throughout Jewish history, with Moses remaining unparalleled until the coming of the promised prophet like Moses. Deuteronomy 18:15. The transition to Joshua was seamless. Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the children of Israel listened to him. Deuteronomy 34:9. The new leader assumed responsibility with full authority and legitimacy. Moses' death marked the end of Israel's formative era. Under his leadership, a mass of fugitive slaves had become a cohesive nation with an identity, laws, a religious system, and a divine purpose. Although Moses did not witness the conquest of Canaan, his legacy enabled Israel to step into that future. The Torah, instruction he received and transmitted, would remain at the heart of Israelite identity for all subsequent generations, fulfilling his final prayer. "Let your glory be manifest to your children, and let the majesty of the Lord our God be upon us." Psalm 90:16-17, attributed to Moses. With Moses' death, Joshua assumed leadership over Israel, receiving a renewed commission directly from God. Joshua 1:6-7 records, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them." Only be strong and very courageous, that you may be careful to do according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. This threefold repetition of the command, be strong and courageous, emphasized that the conquest would depend not only on military skill, but on obedience to the law and trust in divine promises. Joshua immediately began practical preparations, commanding the officers in Joshua 1:11, "Go through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, Prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are to cross this Jordan, to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." A strategic step was to send 2 spies to Jericho, the first fortified city they would face. These men found refuge in the house of Rahab, a prostitute who surprisingly expressed faith in the God of Israel. Joshua 2:11 records her confession. "When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and no one had any courage left because of your presence. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This declaration of faith led to a pact of mutual protection. The spies promised safety for Rahab and her family if she kept their mission secret and identified her house with a scarlet cord during the attack. The crossing of the Jordan River, then at flood stage, demonstrated continuity with Moses' leadership through another water-related miracle. Joshua 3:15-16 describes, "As the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, the waters flowing from upstream stood still and rose up in a heap very far away, and those that went down to the sea were completely cut off." This miraculous event left a deep impression on both the Israelites and the Canaanites. Joshua 4:14 notes, "On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life." To memorialize this crossing, Joshua instructed 12 men, 1 from each tribe, to take stones from the dry riverbed and place them in Gilgal as a perpetual monument. "That this may be a sign among you, and when your children ask in time to come, then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord." Joshua 4:6-7. At Gilgal, Joshua renewed the covenant through 2 fundamental rituals. First, he circumcised all the men born in the wilderness, as this sign of the covenant had been neglected during the journey. Second, they celebrated Passover. The children of Israel camped at Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. Joshua 5:10. Symbolically, these actions declared that Israel was entering the Promised Land as a covenant people, carrying the traditions and commitments established since the Exodus. As he approached Jericho, Joshua had a supernatural encounter described in Joshua 5:13-14. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" He replied, "Neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." This mysterious figure, possibly a theophany or angelic appearance, delivered an unusual strategy for conquering Jericho. "March around the city, all you men of war, circling it once. Do this for 6 days. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow the trumpets, and when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, all the people shall shout with a great shout." Joshua 6:3-5. This unconventional military tactic emphasized that victory would come by divine power, not human strategy. After following these instructions precisely, Joshua 6:20 records the result. The people shouted, and the priests blew the trumpets. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the wall collapsed, and the people charged straight in, and they took the city. The city was completely destroyed, except for Rahab and her family, as promised. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. Joshua 6:25. Her integration into the Israelite community foreshadowed the future inclusion of the Gentiles among God's people. The next battle, against the city of Ai, resulted in an unexpected Israelite defeat. The revealed cause was disobedience to divine instructions. Achan had secretly taken forbidden items from Jericho's spoils. Joshua 7:11-12 explains, Israel has sinned. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. After identifying and punishing the transgressor, Joshua implemented a conventional military strategy against Ai, using an ambush. Take the city, for the Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Joshua 8:7-8. The resulting victory restored Israelite confidence and established an important lesson. Success depended as much on spiritual obedience as on proper tactical planning. Israel's initial victories alarmed the inhabitants of Canaan. While some prepared for military resistance, the people of Gibeon chose a different strategy. Joshua 9:3-4 recounts, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation, whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. By pretending to come from a distant land beyond Canaan's borders, they secured a peace treaty with Israel. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. Joshua 9:15. This decision was made hastily. The Israelites did not inquire of the Lord. Joshua 9:14. When the deception was discovered 3 days later, the treaty was upheld out of respect for the oath, but the Gibeonites were reduced to woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly and for the altar of the Lord. Joshua 9:27. This commitment to keeping one's word, even when obtained through deception, established a principle of integrity that would guide future relations with other peoples. The Gibeonite alliance provoked a significant military reaction. 5 Amorite kings formed a coalition against Gibeon, whose inhabitants appealed to Joshua for help. Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Joshua 10:6. The rapid Israelite response, including a nighttime march from Gilgal to Gibeon, caught the enemy by surprise. During this battle, one of the most extraordinary events of the conquest occurred. Joshua 10:12-13 records, Joshua said to the Lord, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. This supernatural extension of daylight allowed for a complete victory, demonstrating divine control over cosmic forces, particularly significant against worshippers of sun and moon deities. Later, a larger coalition led by Jabin, king of Hazor, mobilized against Israel in the north. Joshua 11:4 describes this army as numerous as the sand on the seashore, with a huge number of horses and chariots. Facing this formidable challenge, God reassured Joshua, do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel slain. Joshua 11:6. The decisive victory at the waters of Merom eliminated the main organized resistance in Canaan, although the conquest remained incomplete. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time. Joshua 11:18. After the major military campaigns, even though many areas remained unconquered, the time had come to distribute the land. Joshua 13:1 records, when Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. The territorial distribution included both conquered and still unoccupied areas, demonstrating faith that God's promise of complete possession would eventually be fulfilled. The process was carried out in Shiloh, where the tabernacle was established, following the procedure described in Joshua 18:6. Describe the land in 7 divisions, and bring the description here to me, and I will cast lots for you in the presence of the Lord our God. This sacred lot casting was not mere chance, but an acknowledgement that the decision is from the Lord. Proverbs 16:33. The tribal allocations respected both Jacob's patriarchal blessings and contemporary circumstances. Before the general distribution, Caleb received a special portion. Joshua 14:10-12 records his request. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years. So here I am today, 85 years old. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. This allocation honored Caleb's persistent faith, as he, at 85 years old, still demonstrated confidence to face the dreaded Anakites, giants, who had terrified the spies 40 years earlier. After establishing tribal boundaries, Joshua implemented justice structures as ordered by Moses. 6 cities of refuge were designated, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. Joshua 23. These cities, 3 on each side of the Jordan, ensured that justice was not compromised by rash vengeance. Additionally, 48 cities were allocated to the Levites, distributed among all the tribes. The Israelites gave the Levites these towns and their pasture lands from their own inheritance, as the Lord commanded. Joshua 21:3. This strategic dispersion of religious ministers facilitated uniform spiritual instruction throughout the territory. Once the territorial distribution was completed, Joshua released the Transjordanian tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, to return to their families beyond the Jordan, recognizing their fulfillment of the promise to assist in the conquest. You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. Joshua 22:2. On their return, these tribes built a great altar by the Jordan, causing alarm among the western tribes, who interpreted the act as apostasy. A delegation was sent to confront them. What is this trespass that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away today from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar that you might rebel against the Lord? Joshua 22:16. Their response clarified the misunderstanding. The altar was not for sacrifices, but a testimonial monument, that in time to come your children may not say to our children, "What have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel?" Joshua 22:24. This altar, called Ed, witness, was to serve as a reminder of national unity despite geographical separation. As he neared the end of his life, Joshua summoned all Israel for a final address. Joshua 23:2-3 records, "I am old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake, for the Lord your God is he who has fought for you." This speech included warnings about the dangers of cultural assimilation. You shall not mix with these nations that remain among you, nor make mention of the names of their gods. Joshua 23:7. Joshua emphasized the fundamental principle of the covenant. Divine faithfulness requires corresponding human faithfulness. In a second gathering at Shechem, a historically significant site where Abraham had received the divine promise, Joshua led a covenant renewal ceremony. He began by recounting sacred history from Terah, Abraham's father, to the present conquest. demonstrating the consistency of God's redemptive purpose throughout generations. This culminated in a direct challenge in Joshua 24:14-15. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth. Choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The response was a unanimous affirmation. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. Joshua 24:18. Joshua formalized this renewed commitment. On that day, Joshua made a covenant with the people and gave them statutes and ordinances in Shechem. Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, Joshua 24:25-26. A great monument was erected as a visual witness to the covenant. Shortly after, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. Joshua 24:29. His burial in Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, marked the end of an era. During this same period, the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem, Joshua 24:32, fulfilling a centuries-old promise and symbolically completing the Exodus journey. The narrative concludes on a positive note. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. Joshua 24:31. However, this spiritual stability would not last beyond that generation, setting the stage for the turbulent period of the Judges. After Joshua's death and the passing of the generation that had witnessed the conquest, Israel entered a period of instability. A key factor was the incomplete conquest. They did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gaza. So the Canaanites have lived among them in Ephraim to this day, Judges 1:29. Similar statements appear for several tribes, indicating a widespread failure to fulfill the divine mandate. This situation created a spiritual challenge described in Judges 2:10-12. That entire generation was gathered to their fathers, and another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the works he had done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods. The primary spiritual threat came from the Canaanite fertility cults, centered around Baal, the storm and fertility god, and Asherah, the fertility goddess. These cults promised agricultural prosperity through rituals that often included sexual practices. For Israelite farmers struggling to survive in a new land, such religion had strong practical appeal. The result was religious syncretism, the blending of Yahweh worship with pagan practices. Judges 2:13 notes, "They forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtoreth." Often this was not outright rejection of Yahweh, but the addition of other gods, violating the first commandment. Politically, Israel lacked centralized leadership. Judges 17:6 describes this reality. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The tribes functioned as a loose confederation, united by common ancestry and religious alliances, but without a permanent central government or national army. This leadership vacuum left Israel vulnerable both to cultural influences and military aggressions from neighboring peoples. When crises arose, charismatic leaders, the judges, emerged temporarily to respond to specific threats, but their impact rarely extended beyond their immediate region or lasted beyond their lifetime. The narrative structure of the Book of Judges follows a recurring cycle summarized in Judges 2:11-19. Apostasy. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Oppression. The anger of the Lord was kindled. He delivered them into the hands of their enemies. Repentance. They cried out to the Lord. Deliverance. The Lord raised up judges for them, and temporary peace. The land had rest. After each judge's death, the cycle restarted, usually with increasing moral deterioration. This pattern was not due to divine caprice, but rather the natural consequences of Israel's choices. By adopting Canaanite practices and weakening their distinct identity, they became vulnerable to external powers, which God allowed as corrective discipline. The very success of the judges often led to new complacency, restarting the cycle. The book presents 6 major cycles of oppression and deliverance, along with additional narratives. With each iteration, Israel appears to sink deeper into apostasy, with progressively shorter periods of peace and increasingly degraded moral behavior. This pattern established a paradigm for interpreting later Israelite history. The historical books often evaluate kings and periods based on their faithfulness to the covenant, describing national calamities as consequences of infidelity and periods of prosperity as results of obedience. Despite this discouraging cycle, a consistent theme emerges: divine faithfulness contrasted with human unfaithfulness. As Judges 2:1 emphasizes, "I will never break my covenant with you." Even in its darkest periods, God never completely abandoned his people, but continued to intervene in response to repentance, demonstrating both justice and mercy. The Book of Judges presents 12 deliverers with detailed narratives for 6 key figures. The first, Othniel, set the standard. The children of Israel cried unto the Lord, and the Lord raised up a deliverer for them. Othniel. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel and went out to war. Judges 3:9-10. Under his leadership, Israel defeated Cushan-Rishathaim of Mesopotamia, securing 40 years of peace. Ehud, the second judge, employed an unusual strategy against Eglon, king of Moab, who had oppressed Israel for 18 years. Being left-handed, an uncommon trait that made him unexpectedly dangerous, he used this advantage to assassinate the king. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. Judges 3:21. This bold action inspired Israel to defeat Moab, resulting in 80 years of peace. The only female judge, Deborah, led Israel against Jabin of Hazor and his commander, Sisera. Her leadership combined judicial authority. She held court under the palm of Deborah, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided, Judges 4:5, with prophetic inspiration. Alongside Barak, she mobilized an army to confront Sisera's 900 iron chariots. Victory came through divine intervention and the unexpected contribution of another woman. After the military defeat, Sisera sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. While he slept in exhaustion, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand, went quietly to him, and drove the peg through his temple until it went down into the ground. Judges 4:21. Gideon received a divine calling while secretly threshing wheat in a winepress to hide from the Midianites. His initial response was doubt. "Ah, my Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Judges 6:15. After divine confirmation through miraculous signs, Gideon led an army against the Midianites. Surprisingly, God reduced his forces from 32,000 to just 300 men, so that Israel may not boast against me, saying, "My own hand has saved me." Judges 7:2. This small force, using psychological tactics, torches hidden in pitchers suddenly revealed with trumpet blasts, defeated the Midianites, leading to 40 years of peace. Unfortunately, Gideon later created an idol that became a snare to Gideon and to his house, Judges 8:27, demonstrating how even successful leaders often compromise the religious purity they initially upheld. Jephthah emerged from adverse circumstances as the son of a prostitute, rejected by his half-brothers. When the Ammonites threatened Israel, the elders of Gilead turned to Jephthah due to his military reputation. His leadership was marked by an imprudent vow: If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph will be the Lord's, and I will offer it as a burnt offering. Judges 11:30-31. After his victory, his only daughter was the first to meet him, resulting in a personal tragedy that illustrates the dangers of rash vows and inadequate understanding of divine requirements. The last major judge, Samson, embodies the contradictions of the period. Consecrated to God from birth as a Nazirite, he possessed supernatural strength but significant moral weakness. His story intertwines divine power with persistent personal failures, especially his attraction to Philistine women, contrary to the covenant. After a series of confrontations with the Philistines, driven more by personal vengeance than national zeal, Samson was captured when Delilah discovered the secret of his strength. With his eyes gouged out and reduced to entertainment for his enemies, Samson ultimately fulfilled his purpose in a sacrificial death. Thus, he killed more in his death than he had killed in his life. Judges 16:30. These judges demonstrate a consistent pattern, God working through imperfect instruments to deliver his people. The emphasis on human weakness underscores that the true source of deliverance was God, not the leader's abilities. The final chapters of Judges 17-21 present disturbing narratives illustrating Israel's moral and religious decline. These stories do not follow the chronological sequence of the rest of the book, but serve as a thematic epilogue, demonstrating the consequences of religious and social anarchy. The first episode involves Micah, a man who established a private sanctuary with a silver idol in his home. A man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim made an ephod and household idols and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. Judges 17:1-5. Later, he hired a Levite as a personal priest, blending Yahwistic worship with idolatrous practices. This privatized religious syncretism represented a complete corruption of the centralized worship system prescribed by the law. The narrative offers no explicit condemnation, reflecting the widespread acceptance of such practices at the time. The situation worsened when warriors from the tribe of Dan, seeking to expand their territory, stole Micah's idols and abducted his priest. The Danites seized what Micah had made, along with the priest he had, and went to Laish. Judges 18:26-27. There, they established a tribal, idolatrous sanctuary that would persist for generations. The second narrative describes a horrific crime in Gibeah of Benjamin. A Levite, traveling with his concubine, sought lodging in Gibeah, where men of the city demanded to sexually abuse him. When his concubine was handed over in his place and died as a result of the abuse, the Levite divided her body into 12 pieces and sent them to the tribes. And it was so that all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never been seen or done from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day." Judges 19:30. This atrocity triggered a civil war when Benjamin refused to hand over the guilty men for justice. The other tribes nearly exterminated Benjamin, reducing it to 600 men. Later, regretting the possible extinction of an entire tribe, they implemented questionable schemes to provide wives for the surviving Benjamites, including the abduction of young women during a festival in Shiloh. These final narratives illustrate how, in the absence of centralized leadership and commitment to the covenant, Israel had descended to a moral level comparable to or even worse than the Canaanites they were supposed to replace. The repeated refrain, "In those days, there was no king in Israel," suggests that monarchy, though not part of the original divine design, became necessary due to moral and spiritual anarchy. The transition from the era of the judges to the monarchy is narrated through the life of Samuel, a figure who combined the roles of prophet, priest, and judge. His story begins with the fervent prayer of his mother, Hannah, who vowed to dedicate him to divine service if she were granted a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. 1 Samuel 1:11. Born in response to this prayer, Samuel was brought to the tabernacle in Shiloh once he was weaned. There he grew up under the care of the priest Eli, in stark contrast to Eli's own corrupt sons. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. 1 Samuel 2:12. This priestly corruption was a symptom of Israel's spiritual decline. Samuel's prophetic calling came in his childhood. 1 Samuel 3:1 notes, "The word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread vision." This scarcity of divine revelation indicated alienation between God and his people. When God called Samuel during the night, the boy initially mistook the voice for Eli's until the priest recognized the divine nature of the call. Samuel's first prophetic message was a judgment against Eli's house. "On that day, I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house." 1 Samuel 3:12. This announcement established Samuel as an authentic prophet, as observed in 1 Samuel 3:20. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. The prophesied judgment was fulfilled when Israel was defeated by the Philistines, the Ark of the Covenant was captured, and Eli's sons died in battle. Upon hearing the news, Eli himself fell backward, broke his neck, and died. This national tragedy marked the end of priestly leadership in Shiloh and set the stage for Samuel's multifaceted ministry. After 7 months of affliction among the Philistines who had taken the ark, it was returned to Israel. Samuel seized this opportunity to lead a spiritual renewal. Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, "If you return to the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only." 1 Samuel 7:3. In response to Samuel's leadership, the people removed their idols and gathered at Mizpah for public confession. During this assembly, the Philistines attacked, but they were defeated by divine intervention. The Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and so confused them that they were overcome before Israel. 1 Samuel 7:10. Samuel commemorated this victory by raising a memorial stone called Ebenezer, Stone of Help, declaring, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." 1 Samuel 7:12. Under his leadership, Israelite cities were recovered, and peace was established with the Amorites. For years, Samuel judged Israel, traveling annually in a circuit between Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah while maintaining his residence in Ramah. In his old age, he appointed his sons as judges, but they did not walk in his ways. They turned aside. After dishonest gain, took bribes and perverted justice. 1 Samuel 8:3. This failure created an opportunity for constitutional change. The elders of Israel approached Samuel, saying, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." 1 Samuel 8:5. Though distressed by the request, Samuel received divine instruction to grant their demand, warning them of the consequences of centralized power. "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons. He will take your daughters. He will take 1/10 of your grain, and you will be his servants." 1 Samuel 8:11-17. Despite this warning, the people insisted, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations." 1 Samuel 8:19-20. This demand revealed a deeper desire for conformity with neighboring cultures, the very problem that had caused cycles of apostasy during the period of the judges. Samuel reluctantly agreed to anoint a king as directed by God, thus concluding the era of the judges. The new monarchy would represent an experiment in centralized government, but the fundamental problems that plagued Israel, its tendency toward idolatry and resistance to divine sovereignty, would persist. manifesting in new ways during the monarchical period. The period of the judges, with its repeated failures and partial deliverances, demonstrated the need for a more permanent solution than a temporary charismatic leader. The stories from this time would later be frequently referenced by the prophets as warnings against apostasy and as reminders of God's faithfulness, even in times of widespread corruption. Its legacy would stand as a testament to the ongoing tension between Israel's call to holiness and its persistent attraction to cultural assimilation. Israel's transition to a monarchy began with popular demand. 1 Samuel 8:5 records, "Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations." In vain, this request revealed a problematic desire to conform to neighboring peoples and a rejection of direct divine sovereignty. Samuel was troubled, but God instructed him, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." 1 Samuel 8:7. Samuel warned about the costs of centralized power, military conscription, forced labor, heavy taxation, and eventual loss of freedom. Despite these warnings, the people insisted, and God directed Samuel to a young Benjaminite named Saul. 1 Samuel 9:2 describes, "He had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people." Samuel privately anointed Saul, declaring, "Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his heritage Israel?" See 1 Samuel 10:1. This anointing was confirmed by predicted signs and later publicly ratified through sacred casting of lots at Mizpah. Saul's reign began promisingly. When messengers from Jabesh Gilead reported an Ammonite threat, the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul, and he summoned all Israel. 1 Samuel 11:6-7. The resulting victory cemented his leadership. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is it that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring the men that we may put them to death." 1 Samuel 11:12. Unfortunately, Saul soon displayed character flaws. In Gilgal, impatient with Samuel's delay, he offered the burnt offering, 1 Samuel 13:9, illegitimately, overstepping priestly duties. Samuel rebuked him, "You have done foolishly. The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue." 1 Samuel 13:13-14. Another revealing episode occurred after victory over the Amalekites. Commanded to destroy the enemy completely, Saul spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen. 1 Samuel 15:9. When confronted, he made excuses. "I feared the people and obeyed their voice." 1 Samuel 15:24. His failure to exercise courageous leadership led to divine rejection. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." 1 Samuel 15:23. Samuel secretly anointed David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem, as the future king. 1 Samuel 16:7 records God's selection criteria. "Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Meanwhile, Saul was afflicted by an evil spirit, and David was brought into the court to soothe him with music, creating a precarious situation where the designated successor served the rejected king. David's fame grew dramatically with his victory over Goliath. 1 Samuel 17:45-47 records his declaration of faith, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." This victory provoked Saul's jealousy, especially when women sang, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." 1 Samuel 18:7. Meanwhile, a deep friendship developed between David and Saul's son Jonathan. The Soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. 1 Samuel 18:1. As Saul's attempts to kill David intensified, David fled, beginning years of persecution. Twice David spared Saul's life, showing respect for divine authority. "The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed." 1 Samuel 24:6. Saul and Jonathan eventually died in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. David deeply mourned, "How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places." 2 Samuel 1:25. He was then anointed king, initially only over Judah in Hebron. For 7 years, David ruled Judah while Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, ruled northern Israel under Abner's influence. Civil war persisted until Abner and Ishbosheth were assassinated, allowing unification. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh." 2 Samuel 5:1. David established Jerusalem as his capital after conquering it from the Jebusites. Strategically located between northern and southern territories, it was not previously associated with any particular tribe. David also brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, centralizing religious worship. They brought the Ark of the Lord and set it in its place, inside the tent that David had pitched for it. 2 Samuel 6:17. When David sought to build a permanent temple, he instead received a greater promise through the prophet Nathan. "When your days are fulfilled, I will raise up your offspring after you, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." 2 Samuel 7:12 and 13. This Davidic covenant would become foundational to future messianic hope. Militarily, David expanded Israel's borders, conquering the Philistines, Moabites, Syrians, Edomites, and Ammonites. He also established an efficient administration with scribes, recorders, priests, and military commanders. Despite these successes, David committed a grave sin with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. 2 Samuel 11:4 recounts, "David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. To cover up the adultery, he ordered Uriah's death. Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die." 2 Samuel 11:15. The prophet Nathan confronted David with a parable about a rich man stealing a poor man's only lamb. When David expressed outrage, Nathan declared, "You are the man." 2 Samuel 12:7. David confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord." 2 Samuel 12:13, and was forgiven. But consequences followed. The death of the child conceived in sin, domestic violence, and rebellion. David's later years were marked by family tragedies, including the rape of Tamar by Amnon, Amnon's murder by Absalom, and Absalom's rebellion and eventual death. Despite these hardships, David maintained the kingdom's unity, ensured Solomon's succession, and laid the foundations for Israel's golden age. Solomon's succession was turbulent. As David lay dying, his surviving eldest son, Adonijah, exalted himself, saying, "I will be king." 1 Kings 1:5. However, intervention by Nathan and Bathsheba secured Solomon's coronation, fulfilling David's earlier promise. At the beginning of his reign, Solomon received an extraordinary divine offer. "Ask what you wish me to give you." 1 Kings 3:5. His response demonstrated humility. "So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." 1 Kings 3:9. Pleased with his request, God granted him unparalleled wisdom, along with wealth and honor. This wisdom was famously displayed in the judgment of two women who both claimed to be the mother of the same baby. By proposing to divide the child with a sword, Solomon identified the true mother by her willingness to give up the baby to save his life. 1 Kings 3:28 records, All Israel heard of the judgment the king had given, and they held the king in awe because they saw that he had the wisdom of God to administer justice. Administratively, Solomon organized Israel into 12 districts to efficiently provide for the royal court. He also developed extensive international trade, including an alliance with Hiram of Tyre to procure materials for the temple. Solomon's most significant project was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. 1 Kings 6:1 provides a precise date. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, he began to build the house of the Lord. After 7 years, the magnificent structure was completed, furnished with sacred items, including new versions of the altar, menorah, and table of showbread. At its dedication, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. 1 Kings 8:11. Solomon prayed eloquently, acknowledging the insufficiency of a physical temple. Even the heavens cannot contain you. How much less this house I have built. 1 Kings 8:27. Nevertheless, he pleaded with God to hear prayers directed toward it both from Israelites and foreigners. Solomon's reign marked the peak of Israelite prosperity. 1 Kings 10:27 observes, "The king made silver in Jerusalem as common as stones." His fame attracted foreign visitors, most notably the Queen of Sheba, who declared, "Not even half was told me. Your wisdom and prosperity far exceed the report I heard." 1 Kings 10:7. Ironically, this prosperity contributed to spiritual decline. Solomon accumulated 700 wives and 300 concubines, many through political alliances. 1 Kings 11:4 describes the consequences. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was no longer fully devoted to the Lord. He built altars for foreign deities, including Chemosh of Moab and Molech of the Ammonites. This apostasy led to divine judgment. "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." 1 Kings 11:11-12. This prophecy set the stage for the kingdom's eventual division. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam faced an immediate crisis when the northern tribes demanded tax relief. "Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us." 1 Kings 12:4. Rejecting the advice of experienced elders, Rehoboam followed the counsel of young advisors and responded harshly, "My father scourged you with whips, but I will scourge you with scorpions." 1 Kings 12:14. This arrogance triggered a national rupture. "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." 1 Kings 12:16. Jeroboam, previously identified by a prophet as a future ruler, returned from exile in Egypt to lead 10 northern tribes, informing a separate kingdom called Israel. Rehoboam retained control only over Judah and Benjamin, forming the southern kingdom of Judah. This political division soon became a religious schism when Jeroboam established alternative worship centers in Dan, far north, and Bethel, southern border. "It is not right for these people to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." 1 Kings 12:28. These golden calves were intended to represent YHWH rather than foreign gods, but they violated the second commandment and competed with the centralized worship in Jerusalem. Jeroboam also instituted a non-Levitical priesthood and alternative festivals on the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing. 1 Kings 12:33. These religious innovations established a pattern of apostasy that would define the history of the northern kingdom. In response to this spiritual decline, God intensified the prophetic ministry. Unlike earlier prophets who primarily advised kings, these new prophets often acted independently, challenging institutions and confronting national apostasy. Elijah exemplified this ministry in the northern kingdom during the reign of Ahab, who married Jezebel and began to serve Baal and worship him. 1 Kings 16:31. Elijah confronted Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." 1 Kings 17:1. After 3 years of drought, a dramatic showdown took place on Mount Carmel between Elijah and 450 prophets of Baal. Elijah challenged the people, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." 1 Kings 18:21. When Baal failed to respond, but Yahweh's fire consumed Elijah's sacrifice, the people proclaimed, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." 1 Kings 18:39. Elisha succeeded Elijah, performing miracles that demonstrated the reality of Israel's God, including purifying a spring in Jericho, multiplying oil for a needy widow, and resurrecting the Shunammite's son. In the southern kingdom, prophets like Isaiah served alongside kings, offering both criticism and encouragement. During the Assyrian crisis, Isaiah reassured King Hezekiah, "This is what the Lord says, do not be afraid of what you have heard. By the way that he came, he will return." 2 Kings 19:32-33. This prophecy was miraculously fulfilled when the Assyrian army was decimated. The prophets also offered hope beyond impending judgment. Through them, God promised future restoration with a renewed covenant. "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." Jeremiah 31:33. Messianic hope centered on the promise of an ideal Davidic king. "I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely." Jeremiah 23:5. This prophetic ministry grew in importance as Israel and Judah approached their final judgment, preserving the divine word through exile and providing a theological foundation for eventual restoration. After the initial separation, the northern kingdom experienced chronic political instability. While Judah maintained the Davidic dynasty, Israel had 9 different dynasties with 19 kings over approximately 210 years. 2 Kings 15 illustrates this volatility, recording 4 kings in rapid succession, including Shallum, who reigned for only 1 month before being assassinated. All the northern rulers receive a standard negative assessment. "He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin." 2 Kings 13:11. This persistent reference to the sins of Jeroboam identifies the establishment of alternative sanctuaries as the fundamental sin that defined the kingdom's deviated religious identity. The situation worsened under Ahab, who did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. 1 Kings 16:30. Influenced by Jezebel, a Sidonian princess, he introduced Baal worship as the official religion and persecuted the prophets of Yahweh. During his reign, we find a notable declaration. Elijah said, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets." 1 Kings 18:22. Although Jehu's reform temporarily reversed Baal's influence, thus Jehu destroyed Baal in Israel. 2 Kings 10:28. He retained the golden calves in Dan and Bethel. No reform was deep or lasting enough to alter the kingdom's trajectory. The prophets persistently warned against the imminent national collapse. Amos proclaimed, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord." Amos 8:11. Hosea used a marital metaphor. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. Then she will say, I will go back to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now. Hosea 2:7. The collapse came gradually. Good Kings 15:29 records, the initial Assyrian victory. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured Ijon, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and he carried the inhabitants captive to Assyria. The final destruction came under Hoshea, the last king of Israel. 2 Kings 17:3-6 recounts, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against him. Then the king of Assyria invaded the whole land, came to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported Israel to Assyria. The biblical assessment is unequivocal about the causes of this disaster. This happened because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord and walked in the statutes of the nations and did secretly things against the Lord. Kings 17:7-9. After the conquest, the Assyrians implemented a population transfer policy. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon and settled them in the towns of Samaria, 2 Kings 17-24. This mixed population developed religious syncretism. They feared the Lord, but also served their own gods, said 2 Kings 17:33. Their descendants would become the Samaritans, a distinct group in the New Testament period. The kingdom of Judah, maintaining the Davidic dynasty, experienced greater political stability than Israel, persisting for approximately 135 years after Samaria's fall. While all the kings of Israel are condemned, several Judean rulers receive a positive evaluation. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. 2 Kings 18:3. Periods of spiritual reform alternated with deep apostasy. Asa removed the male shrine prostitutes from the land and got rid of all the idols his fathers had made. 1 Kings 15:12. His son Jehoshaphat continued the reforms, sending officials to teach in the towns of Judah. They took with them the book of the law of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 17:8-9. King Hezekiah implemented comprehensive reform. He removed the high places, broke down the pillars, and cut down the Asherah pole. He also broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the Israelites had been burning incense to it. 2 Kings 18:4. During his reign, the kingdom survived an Assyrian siege through divine intervention when the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. 2 Kings 19:35. In stark contrast, Hezekiah's son Manasseh led an unprecedented apostasy. He rebuilt the high places, erected altars to Baal, made an Asherah pole, worshipped all the host of heaven. He even made his son pass through the fire, practiced divination, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. 2 Kings 21:3-6. 2 Kings 21-16 adds, Moreover, Manasseh shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end. Although he eventually repented after a temporary captivity in Babylon, the spiritual damage was extensive. 2 Kings 23:26 observes, Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, because of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. Manasseh's grandson, Josiah, led a final notable reform after the discovery of the Book of the Law during the temple's renovation. In response to the book's reading, Josiah made a covenant before the Lord to follow the Lord and keep his commandments, his testimonies, and his statutes. 2 Kings 23:3. He purified the temple, destroyed pagan sanctuaries, eliminated the idolatrous priesthood, and restored the celebration of Passover. Despite these periodic reforms, Judah followed a trajectory similar to Israel. Jeremiah lamented, "Behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery? Then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, 'We are safe.'" Jeremiah 7:8-10. Judgment would be inevitable. Jeremiah warned, "This whole land shall become a desolation and a horror, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. The rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar transformed the regional geopolitics. In 605 BC, after a decisive victory over the Egyptians at Carchemish, the Babylonians secured control over the territory formerly held by the Assyrians. Daniel 1:1-3 records the first deportation. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his eunuchs, to bring some of the sons of Israel, both from the royal lineage and from the nobility. Among these captives were Daniel and his 3 friends. In 597 BC, after King Jehoiakim's rebellion, a larger second deportation took place. 2 Kings 24:12-14 recounts, "Then Jehoiakim, king of Judah, went out to surrender to the king of Babylon. He carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He deported all of Jerusalem, all the princes and all the valiant men, 10,000 captives. Among this group was the prophet Ezekiel, who would receive his prophetic calling in Babylon. Jehoiakim's uncle, Zedekiah, was installed as a vassal king, but eventually he rebelled against the king of Babylon. 2 Kings 24:20. This final rebellion against the explicit counsel of Jeremiah led to complete destruction. 2 Kings 25:1-2 describes Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against Jerusalem, he and all his army, and besieged it. The city remained under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. When severe famine finally forced surrender, Zedekiah attempted to flee but was captured. 2 Kings 25:7 records his cruel fate. They slaughtered Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. Then they blinded Zedekiah and bound him with bronze chains and took him to Babylon. The city and the temple were systematically destroyed. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house, as well as all the houses of Jerusalem. He tore down the walls around Jerusalem. 2 Kings 25:9-10. A third deportation removed most of the remaining population, leaving only some of the poorest people as vine dressers and farmers. 2 Kings 25:12. Jeremiah, who had remained in Jerusalem, was freed by the Babylonians. However, after the assassination of Governor Gedaliah, the remaining Judeans fled to Egypt, taking Jeremiah with them against his will. Lamentations 1:1 expresses anguish over the ruined city. "How lonely sits the city that was once full of people. She has become like a widow, she who was great among the nations." The exiles in Babylon established communities that developed new forms of religious identity without the temple or political independence. Psalm 137:1-4 captures their nostalgia and spiritual struggle. "By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" The national disaster forced a deep theological reevaluation. Why did God allow the destruction of the temple and the defeat of his people? The prophets provided a consistent interpretative framework. Exile was a direct consequence of breaking the covenant. Jeremiah explained, "Because they have forsaken my law and have not walked in it, but have followed the stubbornness of their own hearts. Therefore, I will scatter them among the nations." Jeremiah 9:13-16. Ezekiel emphasized individual responsibility alongside collective destiny. "The soul who sins shall die." Ezekiel 18:4. Crucially, exile represented discipline, not final rejection. Isaiah assured, "For a brief moment I left you, but with great mercies I will gather you." Isaiah 54:7. Jeremiah offered a specific time frame. When 70 years are completed, for Babylon, I will attend to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. Jeremiah 29:10. During the exile, new religious practices emerged to preserve identity without the temple. Circumcision, Sabbath observance, and dietary laws became distinct markers. The synagogue developed as an institution for Torah study and communal prayer. Ezra would later exemplify this new emphasis as a scribe skilled in the law of Moses. Ezra 7:6. The exilic experience also brought a new understanding of suffering. The suffering servant in Isaiah suggested that suffering could have a redemptive purpose. He was pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah 53:5. Prophetic visions assured a future restoration more glorious than the past. Ezekiel envisioned a new temple with life-giving waters flowing from it. Ezekiel 47. Jeremiah promised a new covenant written on hearts rather than stone tablets. Jeremiah 31:34. These hopes would sustain the community through generations of foreign domination. Perhaps the most significant lesson of exile was the permanent purification from idolatry. Before captivity, Israel constantly struggled with the allure of foreign gods. After returning from Babylon, although other spiritual issues persisted, idol worship never again became a serious temptation. The painful exile experience seemingly cured this tendency permanently. The legacy of exile would profoundly shape post-exilic Judaism. The community returned to the land under the leadership of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple and Jerusalem's walls. However, they would never again enjoy full political independence before modern times. They remained under a succession of empires, Persian, Greek, and finally Roman. Through these centuries, they tenaciously preserved their distinct religious identity, supported by the memory of exile as a warning against covenant unfaithfulness. The intertestamental period saw the rise of movements like the Pharisees and Essenes, each interpreting the lessons of exile differently and applying them to contemporary circumstances. At the same time, messianic hope intensified. Interpreting Daniel's visions of successive world kingdoms, many longed for the Son of Man, who would establish an eternal kingdom. When John the Baptist eventually proclaimed, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand," his message resonated with hopes forged in the furnace of the Babylonian exile. Thus, the fall of the kingdoms and the experience of exile, though catastrophic, served as a critical transition in the broader divine purpose of redemption. Israel's story would continue, transformed by judgment, but preserved by divine faithfulness. 4. A decisive role in the redemptive drama yet to fully unfold. We have now reached the end of this remarkable journey through the Old Testament, from creation to exile. As we have seen, this narrative is not merely a historical record of ancient events, but a living testimony of the relationship between God and humanity, with all its highs and lows, promises and failures, judgments and redemptions. The story of God's people teaches us timeless lessons about faithfulness, repentance, the consequences of our choices, and above all, the unbreakable divine mercy that endures even amid our greatest failures. At every stage of this journey, whether in Eden, the Ark, Sinai, Canaan, Jerusalem, or the banks of Babylon's rivers, we see the same God persistently working to restore the broken relationship with His creation. If this message has touched your heart and deepened your understanding of Scripture, help us share these reflections with more people. Subscribe to our channel to continue receiving content that strengthens your faith and biblical knowledge. Share this video with friends, family, and on your social media, because God's Word deserves to be known and reflected upon by all. Just as the Israelites preserved their sacred stories through generations despite exiles and hardships, we too are called to pass on this spiritual legacy. By clicking subscribe and share, you become part of this chain of faith that spans centuries. Until the next video, may the wisdom of Scripture continue to illuminate your path and strengthen your spiritual journey.